Chapter 1402. If they wanted to reinforce the Wizard Association, sending ordinary wizards would not help at all. To be honest, with the foundation of the Wizard Association, there was no way they would be lacking in basic combat power. The only thing they lacked was top-level combat power. Therefore, the Central Continent's wizards had only chosen 7 Grade 4 wizards, led by Grimm. As for Monesh, Gaia and Mary stayed in the Central region, not following the team. The central and eastern regions of the continent were tens of thousands of miles apart. If they relied on airships to transfer troops, it would take at least a month. But if they only needed to send a few high-level wizards, the long-distance teleportation formation was the best choice. The only problem was that Grimm had to maintain his 1,000-meter-long body. It would be difficult for the wizards of the association, who specialized in spell formations, to teleport him over. Below the space crack, many spell formation masters were busy for more than 10 hours before they finally built a giant teleportation formation that covered an area of nearly 100 meters. After checking it several times and making sure there were no mistakes, the spell formation masters took out a large amount of energy from the energy room of the wizard's pagoda and poured it into the teleportation formation. As the intensity of the white light increased, the entire space was illuminated by a white light, making it difficult to see anything. Crack. Following the sound of space being torn apart, the half-sealed light gate in the space crack started to twist and writhe, gradually expanding. After the spell formation master's modifications, the space crack was no longer connected to the abyssal world, but to the teleportation formation of the Wizard Association. The Level 3 Spell Formation Master in charge of building the teleportation formation was already sweating nervously. But no matter how hard they tried, they could not make the space crack expand even a little. At this time, the spatial rift was only 300 meters tall and 5 meters wide. It was not big enough to accommodate Grimm's huge body. After waiting for a while, Grimm was getting impatient. "All of you back off. Leave the rest to me." With heavy steps, Grimm arrived in front of the great spatial crack. With a loud roar, he gathered the Law of Fire in his palms. When both of his palms were covered in a layer of golden light, Grimm inserted them into the space crack, grabbed the edge of the crack, and tore it apart. Crack! With another explosion, the crack expanded from 300 meters to 500 meters, and its width to 8 meters. Violent void hurricanes blew out of the great rift and struck Grimm's tall and majestic body, creating dazzling sparks and ripples. It was still not enough. The 4% rule heart in Grimm's body suddenly pulsed violently. A large amount of pure fire rule power surged out and penetrated his limbs and bones, instantly activating the fire energy in his body. Grimm continued to roar, the muscles on his arms bulging. His golden palms ignored the cutting force of the spatial crack and once again tore it a little wider. Retreat, retreat, retreat. Grimm's action had scared the wits out of all the low and mid-tier wizards on the spot, and their hearts were filled with fear. As far as they knew, no flesh and blood dared to touch the spatial rift at close range. Spatial powers, terrifying slicing properties, were simply irresistible to planar creatures. But now, this legendary fire wizard actually wanted to forcibly pass through the space crack in a moment of impatience. This scared them half to death. Grimm had the protection of the fire rule and 2 divine weapons, so he was naturally unafraid. However, these low-grade magi did not dare to touch the spatial fragment at all. They watched as Grimm tore open the space crack with brute force, causing the spatial fragments to scatter in all directions like raindrops. The void hurricanes also took the opportunity to enter the crack. All the wizards present quickly turned around and ran back to the wizard's pagoda. Clara, Declan, and the rest of the wizards quickly put up an elemental barrier to block the incoming spatial fragments. They looked at Grimm's huge body fighting against the space crack, and it was as if they were watching 2 giant beasts fighting each other. Their eyebrows twitched, and the muscles on their faces tightened. Monster! Monster! There are monsters everywhere these days. After using his strength twice, he finally tore open the space crack to the point where he could barely pass through it. Grim did not dare to waste any time, and he shouted, "Let's go." He took the lead and plunged into the void storm. "Let's go too." Clara and the rest looked at each other, and their faces were full of bitter smiles. With Grim's actions, the teleportation this time was many times more turbulent than before. All the wizards from the central continent who had agreed to fight had no choice but to put on an elemental barrier and a space barrier before entering the spatial rift. East of the continent, 130 miles south of the Black Ink Valley. Crack, crack, crack. A teleportation spell formation built in an empty valley suddenly lit up with a dazzling white light, and soon after, a pitch-black space crack appeared. "It's starting. It's starting. Someone is coming over. Make sure to maintain the stability of the teleportation spell formation. Shimu, increase the protection of the spell formation." Yes. A series of orders were passed down, and the wizards in charge of maintaining the teleportation spell formation took their positions, guiding the teleportation to completion. However, to their surprise, it seemed that the person being teleported over was a big guy, and the space crack that was torn open was not big enough for him to pass through. Hence, after a series of earth-shattering explosions, the space crack was torn open twice, and a 1,000-meter-tall giant covered in golden light crawled out with difficulty. How could he be so big? The wizard in charge of protecting the teleportation spell formation was dumbfounded, and he suddenly screamed, "Quick! Everyone, take back the War Wizard's Pagoda. The teleportation spell formation is about to explode." In the next second, a dozen wizards from the association slipped into the nearby War Wizard's Pagoda like rabbits that had been shot by arrows. They had just raised an elemental barrier to protect the pagoda when the teleportation spell formation, which had been torn to its limit, exploded. The light of law. The 1,000-meter-tall golden giant that Grim had transformed into let out a roar, and a dark red glow rose around his body, blocking the space fragments from exploding. Only then did he slowly pass through the shattered space crack. The 4 wizards that had followed Grim through the teleportation spell formation all crawled out of the huge cloud of dust, their faces covered in dirt. Some of them even had fine space crack marks on their bodies. However, level 4 was still level 4, and these space tremors were not enough to kill them. Such a large formation naturally attracted the attention of some wizards from the high-level association. An old acquaintance of Grim flew over from the direction of the battlefield with a group of subordinates, and they hovered above the messy teleportation spell formation. How did you become so big?" The newcomer wore a white wizard robe, and his whole body was like a ball of milky white light that was bright and gentle. It was the light elemental envoy, Jaredin. Grim slowly moved his limbs and examined his body, and only felt relieved when he did not find any injuries. He stood up straight, and his majestic body almost disappeared into the clouds in the sky. Even Jaredin, who was hovering at a height of only his calf. "Oh, it's Jaredin. I'm here to reinforce the Wizard Association. Why don't you welcome me?" Grim bent down slightly, and his thunderous voice almost deafened Jaredin. "Of course I know you're here to reinforce us. But why did you become so big that even our teleportation spell formation collapsed?" Jaredin had a look of disbelief on his face. He had interacted with Grim before, and naturally knew how strong he was. It had only been a dozen years, but Grim's strength had increased by leaps and bounds, to the point where even Jaredin had to look up to him. This kind of huge contrast made it hard for him to adapt to it for a moment. "Don't be so curious. Tell me about the current situation in Mayuan Valley. Also, did the Silver Alliance and the Northern Lands send people here? Don't tell me you only deceived us to come here. How can this be considered deceiving?" Jaredin hurriedly forced a few laughs. "We're part of the Magus civilization, so we naturally have to shoulder the hardships together. If it wasn't for the plane's feedback, do you think I'd come here? Tell me, who has come from those 2 factions?" Jaredin's expression stiffened, and he laughed bitterly. "Although the Silver Alliance has sent many people, there are only 3 grade 4 magi who can fight. The one leading them is the Alliance's deputy chairman, Meloni, 5 magi from the northern lands have come, and one of them is the super powerful Thuna that you're familiar with. Look, they're here just as we're talking. Grim was tall, so he could naturally see further and clearer than the people present. As if sensing his presence, a group of black figures flew up from not far away and quickly approached him. The one in the lead was a particularly ferocious and terrifying corpse dragon, with 5 witches of different shapes standing on its broad back. The one standing at the front was naturally the leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, whom Grim had dealt with for a long time. Grim, I didn't expect you to be here too. Could it be that you have already advanced? Other magi might not be able to sense it so deeply, but as a powerful being, Thuna was especially sensitive to the aura of loss. Therefore, when she suddenly approached Grim, even Thuna was a little surprised when she sensed the majestic power of the Law of Fire in Grim's huge body. Advanced? It's still early. Grim chuckled. Lady Thuna, I didn't expect you to be faster than us. Why? How's the situation in Mayuan Valley? It's good that you haven't advanced. Hearing this, Thuna inexplicably heaved a sigh of relief. She then realized that she had lost her composure and hurriedly forced a smile to cover it up. I just feel that you've stayed at grade 4 for too short a time, and there's a danger of your foundation becoming shallow. It's better to spend more time consolidating. Chapter 14:03. There were only 5 witches from the Northlands. Apart from Thuna, the leader of the Witches of Death, the rest were all familiar faces. Themis, a Tier 4 Witch of Death, a necromancer by profession. Angelina, a Tier 4 Witch of Deception, class unknown. Tessa, a Tier 4 Pale Witch, class unknown. At the end of the group, Grim even saw Circe, the leader of the Dark Witches. Although Circe had hidden herself in a faint layer of black fog, with the difference in strength between the two of them, Grim could easily see through the barrier of darkness and see her true appearance. As if sensing that the barrier of darkness had lost its effect, Circe dispersed the black fog with a wave of her hand, revealing her figure and appearance. She was a strange woman with a tall and graceful figure. Her skin was pale and withered from not seeing the light of day all year round. Her exposed skin was covered in strange, twisted black runes, and from time to time, wisps of dark energy would leak out. She wore black, tight-fitting leather armor, and her entire body was neat and tidy. 2 snake-shaped daggers were sheathed on her belt. Their surfaces were pitch black and did not reflect any light at all. It was impossible to tell what kind of special metal they were made of. Grim scanned the surroundings. With the power of the law's penetrative power, he could almost instantly detect the peculiarities of the other party's body. Even a Tier 4 dark, which was almost translucent in his eyes. Aside from a few parts of her body, such as her core organs, which were still shrouded in thick darkness, the rest of her body was practically transparent. Enchanted equipment, energy barriers, and ordinary clothes could not prevent the power of the law from penetrating her body at all. Only witchcraft energy fused with the law of darkness could stop Grim's power of the law. However, it was obvious that this Tier 4 Witch of Death did not possess such a high level of mastery over the law. Hence, she no longer had any secrets in front of Grim. As if sensing Grim's focus, Thuna stomped her foot and a pale aura of death spread out, cutting off Grim's line of sight. What's done is done. With your current strength, you can't possibly bully the weak and seek revenge, right? Besides, without that Vulcan bead, you wouldn't have such frightening power. On the other hand, you should be thanking someone. Grim could not help but laugh at Thuna's sophistry. Bullying the weak? I'm afraid she's much older than me. If it wasn't for you, I definitely wouldn't have let this go. Now that you've spoken, I'll... At this point, Grim snorted lightly. Immediately after, a ball of flame suddenly appeared on Circe's right arm and started burning fiercely. Circe cried out in surprise. She waved her arms, and a large amount of dark energy pounced into the flames. However, not only did it not extinguish the flames, it instead made them burn even more fiercely. Amidst the crackling sounds of the flames, the pungent smell of burnt flesh wafted through the air. That Circe was a ruthless one. Unable to extinguish the strange flames after several attempts, she immediately clenched her teeth and pulled out the dagger at her waist, directly cutting off the flesh that was ignited. Large chunks of flesh and blood splattered out along with the burning flames, revealing a badly mangled wound and a small portion of the eerie white arm bone. But to her horror, a faint red halo actually gathered on the wound once again, and with a poof, it ignited into a new flame. This time, the flame directly burned on the arm bone. The witches at the side roared one after another. They either cast witchcraft or used magic wands. All kinds of colorful witchcraft radiance fell on the flames. Suppressed by the joint efforts of the witches, the ball of law flames finally became smaller and smaller. But when it shrunk to the size of a finger, there were no longer any changes. No matter how the witches used the power of law to wash it, or covered it with ice spells, or used some strange sealing spells, they were unable to completely extinguish the golden flame. Seeing that the witches were busy but to no avail, Thuna let out a muffled groan, pursed her lips, and blew on the golden flame, instantly freezing it into a small ice crystal. Stretching out her hand, she pinched the ice crystal between her fingers, raised it in front of her eyes, and carefully examined the vivid and lifelike flame that seemed to be still burning quietly. Thuna said with displeasure, "Is this how you show off your power? Looks like your temper has also grown." Grim smiled indifferently, not reacting to Thuna's actions too much. He laughed and said, "I only gave her a small punishment. I didn't mean to make things too difficult for her. Since she has already been punished, let's write off everything in the past." Thuna's face was cold and stiff. She stared straight at Grim, and after a long time, she sighed and said, "She reaped what she sowed and deserved this evil retribution. All right, let's put this aside. Now we should talk about the main matter. Why did you choose to reinforce the Sorcerer Association? I thought you already hated the association to the bone." Of course I still remember the past debts, but the disaster invasion is a big event for the entire sorcerer world. How can I just stand by and watch? Besides, they promise so many benefits, and there is a lot of plain feedback for me to take. Why should I not? I hope what you said is true. Thuna had a look of, "I'd be a fool to believe you," and sighed softly. "You've just arrived here, so you don't know what the situation is like there. Come with me to the front lines later, and you'll know how bad it is. This time the Sorcerer Association is really in big trouble." After saying that, Thuna glanced at the group of rank 4 Central Continent who were standing orderly not far away, and a strange expression appeared in her eyes. "You're really willing to do this? This place is so dangerous, and you actually brought half of the Central Continent's rank 4 Central Continent here. Be careful, don't let the entire Central Continent's strength be lost here. At that time, even if you have the ability to reach the heavens, you can forget about ruling the entire Central Continent." Grim smiled and said, "In the past, the Central Continent has always been looked down upon by all of you. Why? Isn't it because they're always at the back of the group, always thinking about safety first? As such, how many grade 4 magicians could survive the carnage of the planar battlefield? This time, there's a rare opportunity to train their troops in the plane, and they're all eager to try, taking the initiative to join the battle. How can I dispel their enthusiasm? It's just killing 2 birds with 1 stone." Seeing the bitter smiles on the many rank 4 Central Continent's faces, Thuna naturally knew that Grim's words were not true. However, she was not so kind as to worry for the Central Continent. Seeing that the other party was a genius sorcerer, a simple reminder was enough. Let's go take a look at the battlefield together. Perhaps some of you will regret it when we get there." With that, Thuna stomped her foot. After saying that, Thuna stomped her foot. The huge and towering zombie dragon raised its neck and let out a long roar. It turned around with difficulty and flew toward the direction of the distant battle sounds. Yes, just as they were standing there and conversing, earth-shattering roars and roars could be heard from the horizon from time to time. Ferocious wizard light filled the entire palace, and the terrifying energy ripples caused the world to tremble. Even though they were hundreds of miles apart, the aftershocks of the battlefield had clearly spread to this place. This also meant that the Wizard Association could no longer restrict the battlefield to the Black Ink Valley. Wizard Jirardin, who had come to welcome Grimm and his party, had been standing at the side, quietly listening to their conversation. Only at this moment did he politely lead them towards the battlefield. Along the way, the vast area had been completely occupied by the Wizard Association. War Wizard Towers stood at all the key points and intersections, and the roads leading to the Black Ink Valley were filled with long lines of carriages carrying large amounts of basic resources. In the sky, magi who were riding giant owls or double-headed eagles were circling around, rising and falling, looking extremely busy. However, Grimm's arrival immediately caused chaos on the scene. After all, not everyone had the right to see a terrifying giant that was thousands of meters tall with their own eyes. Looking at this towering figure that seemed to reach the heavens, step by step, and then striding over their heads, all of the sorcerer guards, normal laborers, sorcerer apprentices, and even the low-ranked sorcerers of the association couldn't help but feel a wave of panic in their hearts. The wizard beasts responsible for unloading the goods were so scared that they wet their pants, their limbs trembling as they lay on the ground, unable to get up. The wizards from the association who were riding on flying wizard beasts quickly scattered, not daring to block the terrifying giant's footsteps. Even a team of twin-legged flying dragons flew up from a hidden camp nearby, rushing to the front of Grimm's route to help him chase away those who were in his way. After passing through a vast green grassland, crossing a 100-meter-wide river, and flying over a bald rock peak, Grimm and his party quickly arrived at the battlefield in the Black Ink Valley. With his tall figure, he could instantly see the entire battlefield. Even someone as calm as Grimm could not help but furrow his brows. This was the first time he felt the terror of a clash between the forces of a large dimension. This was a massive battlefield that spanned more than 70 miles. Starting from the rock peak where Grimm was standing, the entire battlefield was filled with war wizard towers. Like the stars surrounding the moon, a tall and majestic top-notch wizard tower stood silently in the center of the battlefield. About 30 miles in front of the wizard's tower, a thick layer of fog spread across the ground. Under the cover of the fog, a giant meandering crack in the ground could be vaguely seen. At this moment, there were waves of mutated beasts surging out of the crack, crazily attacking the war wizard towers near the crack. Every war wizard tower was like a small battle hub. An alarming number of tall wizard beasts surged out of them. Chapter 1404. The sky was a dark red color. The ground was filled with terrifying dark red turbid flows, and the roars of wizard beasts and mutated beasts as they fought could be heard everywhere. The war wizard pagodas had erected energy fields and magical barriers. The entire pagodas were shrouded in light, glowing with magical energy, as dazzling as tall Christmas trees. The former was used to prevent the mutated beasts from getting close, while the latter was used to defend against long-range spells. Every time a horde of mutated beasts approached, the crypt at the bottom of the war wizard pagoda would suddenly open, and an alarming number of terrifying wizard beasts would swarm out. The mutated beasts were a bunch of terrifying monsters whose bodies and souls had been corrupted and distorted by the aura of disaster. They had eagle-like wings, snake-like heads, and lion-like bodies. Their limbs were strong and powerful, and the ends of their claws were curved and sharp. The sharpness of the claws could even tear through a finger-thick, full steel plate armor. An ordinary human warrior was no match for them. The wizard beasts were ferocious beasts created by the wizards through bloodline synthesis. Each of them was more than 5 meters tall, and the surface of their bodies had traces of various ferocious beasts. The wizard beasts were far superior to the mutated beasts in terms of size and strength, and their bodies were protected by specially made scales. Hence, they were extremely ferocious in battle. Usually, a single wizard beast could charge left and right in the tide-like horde of mutated beasts, like a giant tank that was not afraid of death. The mutated beasts obviously had the advantage in numbers. They relied on their ability to fly and run, flying and attacking freely on the battlefield. Usually, when a wizard beast appeared, there would be dozens or even hundreds of mutated beasts surrounding it and killing it. Some of the more fearless mutated beasts would directly pounce on the bodies of the mutated beasts, using their fangs or claws to hang onto the mutated beasts, continuously biting and pulling at them. Most of the ferocious wizard beasts could only charge within 100 meters of the horde of mutated beasts, their bodies already pinned to the numerous enemies. They would bite and tear at the mutated beasts with all their might. Usually, after killing a dozen mutated beasts, the wizard beasts would collapse due to their heavy injuries, becoming food for the mutated beasts. Many of the mutated beasts even roared and tore at each other for the flesh of the wizard beasts. Every time this happened, the nearby War Wizard Pagoda would gather a massive amount of magical energy, transforming it into bolts of terrifying wizard spells that were thrown at the most concentrated areas of the mutated beasts. Violent lightning, meteor rain, earth spear flurry, acid rot swamp, blizzard. All sorts of elemental wizard spells of different shapes and colors swept across the battlefield. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere, the elemental radiance erupted, and corpses littered the ground. There was not a single mutated beast that could withstand the attacks of the Wizard Tower of War's wizard spells. The wizards of the Association hid within the Wizard of War Tower, relying on the sturdy defense of the tower and the protection of the large number of wizard beasts outside the tower to calmly attack every group of mutated beasts that entered their attack range. But many ants could kill an elephant. If the number of mutated beasts gathered increased, coupled with the surprise attack of the hidden disaster creatures, even the War Wizard Pagoda would not be able to guarantee absolute safety. Grim looked into the distance, and he could see the ruins of the War Wizard Pagodas that only had half of their bases left. They were like candles that had been burned out, and the walls of the pagoda were damaged with countless large holes. It was a mess inside, and one could vaguely see blood and broken bones everywhere. One could estimate the approximate losses of the Wizard Association just by looking at the number of casualties suffered by the War Wizard Pagoda. No matter what, it was a terrifyingly large number that was hard to accept. If it were just mutated beasts with the powerful foundation of the Wizard Association, it would be impossible for them to be forced to such a state. In the core area of the battlefield where the War Wizard Tower stood, there were hundreds and thousands of powerful creatures of different shapes and sizes, their bodies shrouded in a strange light, occupying the area. They would occasionally form small teams to attack the War Wizard Towers that were heavily surrounded. Most of them were level 3 or 4 terrifying disaster creatures. Even though they did not have a terrifying natural disaster halo that covered a large area like the Disaster Lord, they could still guide the disaster energy to increase their own offensive or defensive abilities. Thus, once they attacked, the War Wizard Pagoda that they had their eyes on would become a terrifying sacrifice of war. No matter how sturdy the Wizard Pagoda's energy field was, no matter how ferocious the attacks of the wizard spells were, no matter how many groups of wizard beasts surrounded and protected it, it still could not stop the surprise attacks of the terrifying disaster creatures. Balls of green, corrosive poison spat on the energy field of the War Wizard Pagoda, corroding it into a thin piece of paper in less than half a minute. Then, groups of disaster creatures charged in, charging to the outer perimeter of the Wizard's Pagoda. They used their majestic bodies to knock the Wizard's Pagoda until it shook, then used their sharp claws to dig a large hole in the wall of the pagoda that was big enough for them to pass through. As soon as the hole was broken, the disaster creatures rushed inside. A moment later, the shrill screams of the wizards before their deaths came from within the War Wizard Pagoda, accompanied by the rumbling of wizard spells. However, against the foreign creatures with thick skin, high magic resistance, and terrifying disaster abilities, the frail human sorcerers were simply no match for them. Thus, the War Wizard Pagodas fell one after another, the wizards inside either dying or escaping. The losses were hard to calculate. The number of enemies was alarming. and every wizard in the central region who witnessed it felt dizzy, their faces pale. At Grimm's level, he no longer cared about these low-level magical beasts, mutated beasts, and disaster creatures. He squinted his eyes, silently observing a few particularly strong and eye-catching lesser disaster lords among the group of disaster creatures. In essence, they were not worthy of the title of disaster lord. At most, they were the subordinates or fighters of a real disaster lord. They did not have a fixed body shape or appearance, and the only thing that could distinguish them from other dimensional creatures was the extremely eye-catching aura of chaos. This aura was so incompatible with the laws of the plane that every single one of the calamity creatures was shrouded in a purplish-black fog that could not be dispersed. It was not actually fog, but an anomaly left behind by the collision of two completely opposite auras of laws. The closer one was to the cracked canyon, the more obvious the aura of disaster was, and the more damaged the dimensional law of the wizard world was. As the dimensional law of the wizard world regressed, the dimensional law of the wizard world became weaker and weaker. The demonic wave would last for hundreds of years. Once the disaster creatures adapted to the dimensional law and rushed out of the Black Abyss Valley, they would only bring endless slaughter and terrible disasters to the native creatures of the wizard world. From this point of view, it was only a matter of time before the various forces sent reinforcements to the Wizard Association. After all, everyone was in the same boat. If the disaster creatures broke in and took root here, everyone would be in trouble, very much so. Fortunately, the ones who targeted the wizard world this time were just some low-level disaster lords, not the lord-level existences of the disaster world. Otherwise, the Wizard Association would have asked for help from the outer realm and begged those great wizards to send some clones or subordinates back to control the situation. It was reported that the sorcerer world this time was targeted by a grade 6 disaster lord called Diarmus. His original body was a 3-headed hellhound that was over 100 meters tall. Each of his heads could control a special magical element, and he possessed incomparable strength. The lesser disaster Lord Siahuf that Grimm met in the Arcane Kingdom was actually a grade 4 aberration clone of Diarmus. This time, Diarmus took advantage of the sorcerer world being attacked by the demonic wave to come and take advantage of it. Of course, such a move had to be retaliated. At the very least, they couldn't let the disaster creatures corrode and transform the Black Abyss Valley into a bridgehead for the disaster plane to invade the sorcerer world. Otherwise, once the real disaster lord broke into the sorcerer world, they would have to pay a price that was thousands of times more severe than it was now. One had to know that the fall of most plane worlds was not caused by natural disasters. Usually, it was due to the invasion of disasters, the abyss, or other evil races that turned it into a land of death. When sorcerers invaded, they would at most plunder some resources and population. They would rarely carry out a destructive attack on the plane world. Only evil races like the Calamities, the Abyss, and the Astral Beasts would indiscriminately destroy the origin of a dimensional world or pollute and mutate the dimensional origin of an entire dimensional world, distorting all the creatures in the dimensional world into obedient mutated beasts. Therefore, when disaster creatures or astral beasts appeared in a plane world, it was often the moment when the world was at its end. However, it was still very difficult for a grade 6 creature like Diarmus to break into the sorcerer world. The huge chaotic energy and aura in its body would trigger the strongest backlash of the sorcerer world's plane law. Therefore, before it really invaded, it would send out a large number of subordinates to drive a steady stream of aberration beasts to pollute and distort the plane law near the spatial rift. This was also one of their most commonly used sinister methods. If the invaded plane world did not have enough powerful means to repel the attack of the aberration beasts and force its subordinates to retreat, when the spatial barrier was eroded into a hole of sufficient size, it would be the time for the grade 6 disaster lord to make its appearance. With a grade 4 against a grade 6, even if the sorcerers had the local advantage, they would still collapse in the face of its terrifying might. They would then become the target of its wanton slaughter and devour. At that moment, even a powerful being like Thuna would no longer be safe. Powerful sorcerers like Grimm, who had the power of laws but had not reached grade 5, were an indispensable delicacy in the eyes of the Disaster Lord. Therefore, helping the Sorcerer Association was actually helping itself. Chapter 1405. What's the situation below Black Ink Valley now? Grimm asked in a low voice. Although his question was vague, the Magi present understood what he meant. The magus who led him here, Jaredin, had a gloomy expression as he muttered, "Advanced grade 4. Hearing this, the many central grade 4 Magi who came with the team could not help but burst into an uproar. This meant that the strength of the invading disaster creatures near Black Ink Valley was at the upper limit of grade 4. Although it was still a small grade away from the true upper limit of the Magus world, with the powerful physique and terrifying fighting style of the disaster creatures, they were actually not far from the pinnacle of grade 4 super beings. It had to be said that the mutant beasts coming to their deaths over the past few months had indeed weakened the strength of the space barrier near Black Ink Valley. When the laws of the plane could no longer suppress the invading disaster creatures, the Magi would lose the so-called local advantage when fighting the disaster creatures. That was the most terrifying point. How much time do we have? Thuna, who was perched on the back of a zombie dragon, asked coldly. 40 days at most. By then, the suppression of the plane's consciousness on the disaster creatures will disappear. By then, Jaredin did not finish his sentence, but the Magi present were all veterans of plane conquest. They could naturally imagine the terrifying consequences. Where's Domhnall? He called us here. Isn't he going to show himself? Not far away, a group of Alliance wizards in silver robes flew over and questioned Gerard sternly. Before Gerard could speak, the space around him suddenly wrinkled and twisted like a piece of transparent cloth. The space trembled slightly. When the dense ripples turned into ripples, Domhnall emerged from the void step by step with his staff in hand. "Welcome, Madame Thuna, Deputy Chairman Maloney, Lord Grimm, welcome." Domhnall apologized to everyone as soon as he appeared. When his gaze landed on Grimm's gigantic body, he was a little absent-minded and paused for a moment when he greeted Grimm. The way he addressed the three leaders revealed some problems. The Deputy Chairman of the Silver Alliance could not help but look up and size Grimm up. To be honest, Grimm's current state was too strange. His energy aura was obscure and hard to distinguish. It was no wonder that Maloney, who did not know the inside story, could not figure out his true level. However, the purpose of everyone's visit was not to exchange pleasantries, but to deal with the terrifying calamity creatures. Hence, it was Deputy Chairman Maloney who took the lead and asked in a deep voice, "Domner, what's wrong with the Sorcerer Association? You're so powerful. So why did you allow the calamity creatures to take root in the Black Ink Valley and cause such a huge mess?" A hint of awkwardness appeared on Domner's old face. He sighed and said, "Because none of us expected that Dilmas was so eager to rush into the sorcerer world that he actually sent his main body to wait at the spatial fissure below Ink Abyss Valley." "What? Are you sure it's Diarmas's real body?" This was the first time everyone had heard of this news, and they couldn't help but be shocked. Dilmas was a Class 6 dire beast, a famous calamity lord in the entire multiverse. If he personally waited there, even if his main body could not cross over, he could still attack through the spatial fissure and cause terrible damage to the sorcerers who went to seal or purify the calamity aura. It's confirmed. The smile on Domner's face was strangely bitter. Everyone could tell that the Sorcerer Association must have paid a heavy price to verify this information. Then, what does the association mean? Maloney asked. Now, everyone can see that there are more than 1,000 high-level calamity creatures gathered at the entrance of Ink Abyss Valley. Their strength ranges from Class 2 to Class 4, and the biggest headache for us is that there are as many as 21 Class 4 creatures. If we only need to defend the tower, our association's power is more than enough. We can definitely seal these calamity creatures in Ink Abyss Valley. But if we want to expel them and purify the calamity aura in Ink Abyss Valley, we can't do it with our own power. But if we don't find a way to repel these calamity creatures and purify Ink Abyss Valley, the power of laws of the plane won't be able to occupy this place again. Once the chain of laws here is completely shattered, that Class 6 Dire Beast will be able to get in. At this point, Domner looked around at everyone and sighed. During the demonic tide, the major organizations are also in troubled times, and they are overwhelmed with work. If not for the fact that we have no other way out, I'm afraid I wouldn't have put down my old face to ask you for help. Now that you have a clear understanding of everything here, it's up to you whether you're willing to help or not. Everyone's faces were gloomy. They had no choice. Although they were Tier 4 sorcerers, the number of Class 4 Dire Beasts on the battlefield was not much less than theirs. There was no such thing as true safety on the battlefield. A moment of carelessness could result in death. Therefore, even Tier 4 sorcerers like them were nervous and uneasy before setting foot on a planar battlefield of this level. We have no problems on our side. Thuna was the first to express her stance. As one of the 2 super strong witches in the northern region, she naturally had unparalleled prestige among the witches. Therefore, after Thuna expressed her stance, the other rank 4 witches standing behind her did not move. It was obvious that they would follow her lead. We, the Silver Alliance, have no problems either. Since we're here, we naturally have to fight these calamity creatures. Deputy Chairman Maloney of the Silver Alliance also expressed his stance. Behind him, the 7 Silver Alliance sorcerers of different heights and races all had a natural expression, as if they did not care about their own lives. Compared to them, the Tier 4 sorcerers of the Central Continent that Grimm had brought with him were a little unstable. Dilmas must not enter the sorcerer world. Just as the Tier 4 sorcerers of the Central Continent were deep in thought, Grimm's deep voice suddenly rang out in everyone's ears. In order to achieve this, we, the sorcerers of the Central Continent, are willing to participate in the war. However, Grimm's tall body leaned forward slightly as he stared at Domner. Both sides have never truly worked together before. Furthermore, our battle styles are also different. Hence, we, the Central Continent, will only fight as a group and will not accept being split up. Hearing this, the expressions of the 7 Tier 4 sorcerers of the Central Continent improved slightly. After all, Grimm's current strength was already enough to suppress the super powerful beings. Having a powerhouse like him by their side was much better than being incorporated into the association's battle team as cannon fodder. Seconded, we, the Northern Witches, also request to fight as a group. Same for us. We will not accept a single transfer order from the association. Even though it was not perfect, it was reasonable for the 3 factions to make such a request. Hence, Domner thought about it for a moment before nodding in agreement. Under Domner and Jaredon's lead, the group continued forward and arrived near the Wizard Tower. The rest of the sorcerers followed Domner and the rest into the Wizard Tower to rest, while Grimm could only stay outside the tower due to his body size. He stood quietly on the spot and adjusted his breathing. In the past battles, even though the Wizard Association had called back all of the Tier 4 sorcerers and super powerful beings, they were still unable to gain an advantage in terms of strength when faced with an equally large number of disaster creatures. Hence, in the past month, the Association could only adopt a defensive stance, silently relying on the War Wizard Tower and the Wizard Tower to whittle down the enemy's strength. If it were another race, this defensive tactic might work. But it paled in comparison to a powerful race like the disaster creatures that could easily contaminate and mutate an entire dimension. The disaster creatures had the support of several dimensions, and they were not afraid of such a battle of attrition. In fact, many large dimensions that were once famous in the multiverse have been forcefully flattened by the disaster creatures using this unfathomable tactic. Hence, in order to break this vicious cycle, the Wizard Association could only adopt more aggressive and radical tactics. This required the Wizard Association to leave the protection of the Wizard Pagoda and take the initiative to challenge the disaster creatures to whittle down their numbers. After all, while there might be an endless number of mutated beasts, the number of mid-level and high-level disaster creatures was limited. As long as their numbers were whittled down to a certain extent, the Wizard Association would be able to organize a beheading team to launch a surprise attack on the space crack beneath the Ink Abyss Valley. Even though the outcome of the battle was not clear, this was the only method the Wizard Association could come up with. The arrival of the 3 reinforcement teams of sorcerers had undoubtedly attracted the attention of the disaster creatures. This was especially so when Grimm's massive body, which was 1,000 meters tall, stood beside the Wizard Pagoda. He was indomitable and eye-catching. Anyone who could expand their body to 1,000 meters was not a weakling. Even though ordinary people could also use the swell spell to enlarge their bodies, doing so would be akin to asking for death when facing opponents of the same level. Without sufficient energy to protect their bodies, without sufficient energy to support the circulation of their bodies, it would be understandable if they only wanted to show off and intimidate their opponents. But if they forced their bodies to step onto the battlefield, this was somewhat unimaginable. To be honest, Grimm's appearance had truly shocked the disaster creatures. Chapter 1406. The intensity of the battle intensified with the arrival of the wizard's reinforcements. Under the command of the Level 4 disaster creatures, hordes of mutated beasts crawled out of the cracks in the ground, hissing as they flew into the sky. Fortunately, their wings were not enough to support them to fly more than 100 meters in the air. They could only gather in flocks and fly in the sky like terrifying crows, attempting to charge out of this bloody land surrounded by the War Wizard Pagodas. The War Wizard Pagodas shone with a blinding magical radiance, using bolts of rapid wizard spells to strike the hordes of mutated beasts into the sky. On the ground, a large group of wizard beasts were entrenched around the War Wizard Pagodas, defending against the waves of attacks from the mutated beasts. The wizard beasts and mutated beasts were 2 kinds of specially bred killing machines, unafraid of death, bloodthirsty, and cruel. So long as they collided, it would definitely be a shocking and bloody massacre. Both sides were wild beasts without intelligence, and their sole source's killing characteristics were amplified by various terrifying methods. Therefore, they were using a kind of suicidal brutality to wantonly consume their own lives. As the battle continued, the endless stream of mutated beasts gradually gained an advantage in numbers, starting to push back the wizard beasts. Making use of the cracks in the battlefield, the hordes of disaster creatures started to quickly wipe out the lone War Wizard Pagodas. As long as there was a tiny crack in any of the War Wizard Pagodas, there would be terrifying disaster creatures continuously tearing it apart under the dense cannon fire. When the crack turned into a hole, it was also the moment the War Wizard Pagodas announced that they had reached the end of their lives. The disaster creatures that swarmed into the War Wizard Pagoda ran amok without the slightest scruple. They dragged out every human wizard hiding in the War Wizard Pagoda and devoured them alive. Only when the War Wizard Pagodas exploded into giant fireworks under the control of the wizards at the back did this cruel massacre temporarily come to an end. Pushing out layer by layer, the War Wizard Pagodas were destroyed one after another, and the situation of the Wizard Association instantly became abnormally serious. And every time this happened, it was time for the high-level wizards to leave the Wizard Pagodas and start to wipe out the battlefield. Countless black dots flew out from the tall Wizard Pagodas, slowly approaching the front lines of the battlefield. When they reached a certain distance, all of the wizards stopped in their tracks. The elemental sorcerers spread out and began to silently chant the long and tedious incantation syllables of high-grade witchcraft. The anatomy refinery sorcerers and bloodline sorcerers were scattered around, silently preparing for battle. After 40 to 50 flicks of his fingers, high-rank spells with astonishing power and a large area of effect exploded in the horde of mutated beasts like fireworks. Hundreds and thousands of mutated beasts exploded one after another like canned meat in every space, wreaking havoc and overturning by the spell. A dozen or so huge gaps immediately appeared in the dense horde of mutated beasts on the battlefield. Inside the gap, blood splattered everywhere and severed limbs were everywhere. The entire ground was instantly filled with black and red wreckage and blood, turning into a terrifying blood swamp. Howl! An ear-piercing screech rang out. On the ground, hordes of mutated beasts soared into the sky, flapping their strange, twisted wings with all their might as they pounced towards the human magi in the sky. The disaster creatures were indescribably excited. They dived into the horde of mutated beasts and used them as cover to sneak towards the battlefield. This time, all of them were magi from the association. There was a total of 43 magi, including 1 super expert, 3 Tier 4 magi, 17 Tier 3 magi, and 22 Tier 2 magi. There are no Tier 1 magi in the team. In a planar war of this level, if ordinary Tier 1 magi were to enter the battlefield, they would not even be able to withstand the aftermath of the battle and would be killed by the enemy in droves. Even those Tier 2 magi were at the peak of Tier 2 and possessed powerful combat abilities. Otherwise, they would be a group of paper men that would scatter at the slightest touch on the battlefield. The enemy is coming. Everyone be on your guard. Attention, all anatomy refinery sorcerers, step out and prepare to face the enemy with me. At the forefront of the team, the Tier 4 anatomy refinery sorcerer, Henry, roared loudly, constantly giving out orders. Behind him and at his sides, more than 10 anatomy refinery sorcerers stood out. They were wearing leather armors, cloth robes, and even the magic tools in their hands. However, the only thing they had in common was that there was a faint layer of light flowing on the surface of their bodies, as if they had refined their bodies into some kind of magic tool. Behind the anatomy refinery sorcerers, the bloodline sorceress Neve also screamed. All bloodline sorcerers, prepare to transform. Pay attention to protect the elemental sorcerers beside you. After roaring this sentence, Nefu's white robe was suddenly torn apart by her exploding body. Neve's body, which was originally only 7 meters tall, rapidly expanded like a balloon, and the surface of her body was quickly covered with a layer of fine dark green scales. Her head also twisted and deformed, her front mouth protruding forward and splitting into a triangular snake head. Scarlet's slender forked snake tongue poked out from the split mouth, hissing in a strange manner. In less than 3 seconds, Neve had already transformed into a terrifying magic snake with a body length of 30 meters and a body diameter of 3 meters. She quickly coiled into a snake formation, her upper body raised high, quietly waiting for the outbreak of war. The rest of the bloodline sorcerers had also completed their bloodline transformation. Some transformed into blood apes, some transformed into large wind elementals, some transformed into 2-headed trolls, and some transformed into demonic giants. With the powerful bloodline transformation ability, the originally frail human sorcerers immediately became powerful beasts that even disaster creatures and abyssal demons did not dare to provoke. As for the group of elemental sorcerers at the back of the team, they all propped up magic shields and colorful elemental defenses, and then continued to use super powerful spells to kill the mutated beasts that pounced on them. The light elemental envoy Gerard stood in the middle of the elemental sorcery. At this moment, he had transformed into a huge light man that people could not look at directly, his whole body bursting with blinding light. 2 milky white rays of light shot out from his eyes, piercing straight into the battlefield and rampaging there. Wherever the rays of light went, the bodies of the mutated beasts seemed to be swallowed and assimilated by the light element. The parts of their bodies that the rays shone on quickly turned milky white, and they quickly disintegrated into countless tiny light particles. In an instant, the sky was filled with stinking purple blood and body parts like raindrops, and the attack of the entire group of mutated beasts seemed to be slightly stagnant. The super powerful Savorius stood stiffly at the back of the team. His attention was not on the battlefield, but he could not help but look back at Grimm's huge body that was thousands of meters tall. His gaze also alerted Grimm. Grimm's huge eyes opened and swept a glance at Savorius's body, then closed his eyes to rest without a care. Such a contemptuous action had undoubtedly ignited the fury in Savorius's heart. However, for some reason, his throat was dry and hoarse, and he did not even dare to curse. He could only silently turn his body and stand there resentfully. Just as he was absent-minded, the front of the group of mutated beasts had already collided with the body refinement sorcerers who were stationed at the periphery. In an instant, waves of blood filled the air, and body parts flew everywhere. The entire front line was filled with a powerful and violent force. Whether it was wielding magic weapons or barehanded, the body refinement sorcerers who had tempered their bodies to the point that they were comparable to superalloys were all monsters of flesh with astonishing strength. Every move they made could cause a violent wind vortex that was comparable to that of a rank 2 spell. Every punch they made was like a transparent tornado of wind pressure, and every kick they made was filled with an incomparably violent force. In front of them, the rank 1 and 2 mutated beasts were like a school of fish that had rushed into a violent torrent. Apart from being involuntarily swept away, they also had to bear the wind pressure of thousands of different forces that came from all directions. As a result, groups of mutated beasts that had just rushed to the side of the body refinement sorcerers were cut into pieces by countless transparent blades. They were minced into a sky full of blood paste and minced meat, which then converged into waves of blood that slapped the bodies of the people behind them. The violent waves of blood came one after another, like a huge wave of turbid waves that quickly engulfed the following group of mutated beasts. With such terrifying power and violence, if the group of mutated beasts had even the slightest intelligence, they would have been frightened by the other party's momentum. But at this moment, the ferocious nature of the group of mutated beasts that were not afraid of death drove them to rush into the blood wave without hesitation. Ga. While letting out ear-piercing screams, the mutated beasts rushed out of the blood wave, ignoring the terrifying wounds on their bodies, and madly rushed towards the nearest enemy. High-grade body refinement sorcerers are a group of impenetrable walls, but this kind of violent force also consumed a lot of their energy. Therefore, in the gap between their punches and kicks, there was still a large group of fish that slipped through the bloodline and rushed to their side. Henry stood at the forefront, calmly looking at the mutated beasts with blood-red eyes, huge fangs, and sharp claws pouncing towards him. He didn't seem to be accumulating any energy in his hands, but he quickly punched out with his fists. The front part of the fist compressed the air to form a transparent bullet, punching out in a straight line, penetrating the bodies of more than a dozen mutated beasts in an instant. Under the control of his consciousness, the strong wind around his fist formed a spiraling tornado of wind pressure that kept spreading outwards as he charged forward. All the mutated beasts that were caught in the tornado were like being thrown into a meat grinder, turning into pieces of fine flesh and blood that were swept away. Henry didn't cast any elemental sorcery, just simple and regular punches, turning the space in front of him into a dead zone that no life can set foot in. Whoever enters will die, and those who block will die. Chapter 1407. Horner's berserk behavior obviously provoked the anger of the disaster creatures. Soon, several rank 4 disaster creatures rushed to the front of the battlefield under the cover of the group of mutated beasts. There was a loud explosion. A strange spider ape broke through the blood wave and appeared in front of Horton with a roar. The spider ape is a strange creature formed by the bloodline of the giant berserk ape and the underground spiky spider. Its upper body was like that of a chimpanzee, covered in thick, black hair and bulging muscles. Its lower body was that of an 8-clawed spider, its hairy limbs flickering with gray luster. Like the other disaster creatures, this arachnid ape didn't have any weapons or equipment on it. It only held a black spear with a sharpened tip in its right hand. Looking at the material, it seems to be made of wood. However, being chosen by a rank 4 disaster creature and being able to swing it like the wind, this wooden spear is obviously not as ordinary as it looks. As soon as it rushed through the blood wave, the spider ape's 8 hairy legs stepped on the void and pounced towards Horton. Reckless guy, go to hell. Horton roared and quickly punched with both fists, blasting many terrifying shells towards the spider ape like cannonballs. The spider ape didn't dodge. Instead, it stretched out its arms to protect its face and chest and rushed straight over. Dong, dong, dong. Several shells hit the spider ape's shoulders, arms, and waist in succession, causing its black hair to flutter and its muscles to tremble, but it didn't hurt it in the slightest. The spider ape rushed to the side, raised its right arm, and thrust the black spear straight towards Horton's chest like a bolt of lightning. As a physique-refining sorcerer, using brute force is their specialty. Horton also clenched his right fist, condensing a pale purple halo on his fist, and bombarded the tip of the spear without hesitation. The tip of the spear collided with the fist, and a violent force wrapped around it collided with each other, immediately turning into a terrifying energy wave that swept in all directions. The physique-refining sorcerers closest to the battlefield were sent flying, but the two strangely didn't move at all. His fist pressed against the tip of the spear, and the muscles on his body trembled, as if he was in a frenzied struggle. In terms of physical strength, both sides were evenly matched, and there was no difference in their strengths. In terms of physique and endurance, the arachnid ape had a slight advantage. However, apart from basic vitality and strength, combat also included some external things, such as equipment. When the two of them were in a stalemate, the bracers on Horton's hands, the pendant on his neck, and the belt on his waist lit up with magic runes at the same time. After that, they turned into streams of magic energy that flowed into his body. In the next second, Huadun's strength increased by nearly half. A violent and majestic force turned into an irresistible force that quickly engulfed his opponent. The arachnid ape was doing its best to resist when it suddenly felt an irresistible force surging towards it. Before it could retreat out of the range of the opponent's attack, Huadun's iron fist had already knocked away the spear, and his fist landed on its chest. It was a loud bang. The back of the arachnid ape exploded, revealing a bloody hole. Horton's iron fist pierced through it. The arachnid ape was in so much pain that it wanted to die. Its 8 limbs frantically retreated, and it pulled its body out of Horton's fist. It swung its spear even more wildly, the tip of the spear flickering with a black glow, leaving black marks in the air that did not disperse even after a long time. Huadun had intended to take advantage of the situation and smash the arachnid ape's head, but his charging figure was blocked by the black marks, and he could not get close to the arachnid ape. The middle finger of his right hand that had collided with the spear had already exploded, and there was a small black hole on it. Drops of black blood flowed out of the bloody hole, and the deadly poison contained in the blood turned into wisps of black smoke under the pressure of the violent force and drifted out. Bang, bang, bang. 3 strangely shaped calamity creatures, all of them tier 4 in strength, broke through the waves of blood and appeared before Horton. The arachnid ape roared in pain. Although there was a large hole in its body, it still bared its teeth and charged forward once more. Huadun could not help but frown. It had to be known that such terrifying injuries were enough to kill an ordinary creature, but that arachnid ape was still fighting on the battlefield with such vigor. The valiant and ruthless nature of the calamity creatures was evident from this. In a one-on-one duel, Huadun was confident that he could kill any calamity creature of the same tier with his equipment and techniques. However, fighting 1 against 4, no, 3.5, even if Huadun's strength increased by a small rank, it would still be difficult. And at this critical moment, a poison cannon that covered a radius of 10 meters exploded in the middle of the 3 calamity creatures. Following which, the bloodline witch Neve, who had transformed into a ferocious snake, quickly slithered over and stood beside Huadun in front of the 4 calamity creatures. Both sides exchanged blows, each using their own combat skills, and clashed on the front lines of the battlefield. In the middle of the battlefield, the light elemental envoy Jaredin had transformed into a terrifying ball of white light, and 2 milky white rays shot out from his eyes. Wherever he went, the battlefield was cut up and turned into a complete mess. Even the few level 4 calamity creatures that were fighting fiercely would be penetrated by the white light if they were not careful, and would shriek in pain as they fled to the side. Once a level 4 wizard attacked with all his might, he would indeed have the terrifying power to dominate the battlefield. After the Association's battle team opened up the battlefield in the middle, the other wizard teams that had come as reinforcements flew out of the Wizard's Pagoda one after another, and began to clean up the mutated beasts and calamity creatures gathered around the cracks in the ground. According to the division of labor that had been discussed, the Association's battle team was in the middle, the Northern Witches and Central Wizards on the left, and the Silver Alliance on the right. They formed a fan shape and began to attack the enemy from both sides. The reason for this division of labor was because of the difference in strength between the various wizard organizations. Although Grimm had appeared in the Central Region, the wizards of the Central Region were still the weakest among all the organizations. The Central Wizard Battle Team had never carried out a group battle and had never organized a large-scale dimensional war. This was the main weakness of the Central Wizard Battle Team. In such a bloody and cruel dimensional war, the strength of a single person was never enough. Only a team that trusted each other could make use of their strengths and discard their weaknesses and display the greatest advantage in battle. In this aspect, the wizards of the Central Wizard Battle Team undoubtedly lacked the sense of teamwork, collective thinking, mutual trust, and war spells. What was even more hateful was that even at this moment, there were still some people with ulterior motives who were silently speculating whether this was a method by the legendary fire wizard to kill others with a borrowed knife. Thus, when faced with such a motley crew, it was impossible to control their strength without some thunderous methods. Clara, mid-level level 4, Witch, Sealer, skilled in dark sealing spells. Declan, low-level level 4, Wizard, body tempering wizard, skilled in close combat. Alfred, mid-level level 4, Wizard, elemental wizard, skilled in sound wave spells. Matthew, low-level level 4, Wizard, summoner, skilled in summoning powerful creatures from another world. Nicholas, low-level level 4, Wizard, elemental wizard, skilled in water spells. Ariza, low-level level 4, Wizard, bloodline wizard, able to transform into a human lion. Roderick, low-level level 4, Wizard, elemental wizard, skilled in plant spells. Although there seemed to be a variety of talents, combining them into a team capable of fighting against the Tier 4 calamity creatures was enough to make one's heart explode. Although there were many members, the only one who could act as a meat shield was the body-tempering wizard, Declan. Although Ariza was a bloodline wizard and could transform into a human lion, this ancient demonic creature was not proficient in direct combat. Instead, it preferred to use illusions and perception absorption to deceive or tempt its enemies. Thus, it seemed that Declan could only be chosen as the vanguard of this large Tier 4 team. He would then have Matthew summon some thick-skinned, otherworld creatures to support him. It was fine if their defense was weak, but this team's attack was also extremely weak. Although they were all elemental wizards, most of them were proficient in single-target, instant-cast spells. As for large-scale, powerful spells that required the protection of others and required a long period of incantation to cast, they were all lacking. It was fine if they did not have any combat spells. As long as they were well-equipped, they should have no problems fighting one-on-one calamity creatures of the same rank, right? However, many of the Central Continent's magi could not even do this. They did have a lot of witchcraft tools and powerful witchcraft tools, but most of them were used to save their lives and escape, and some were used to assist in defense. As for offensive types, it wasn't that there wasn't a single one, but there were very few of them. Truth be told, when Grimm obtained the basic information on the Tier 4 magi of the Central Continent through various methods, he felt his heart turn cold. At the same time, he finally understood why the 3 great Magus organizations looked at the Central Continent with disdain. Seeing that the other Magus organizations had already arranged their troops to kill their way to the front lines, Grimm could only sigh inwardly and give a concise command. Declan, you'll be in charge of the front lines. Matthew, you'll summon some powerful monsters to support Declan. Elisa, you'll be in charge of the second line of defense. The rest of you, stay by my side and use long-range spells to clear out the mutated beasts. All right, let's advance. With that said, flames surged around Grimm's body, and in an instant his entire body was enveloped in scarlet flames that were so hot they were almost white. As he advanced, he casually waved his hand to scatter flame runes. These flame runes were like birds returning to the forest, entering the bodies of the Tier 4 Magi of the Central Continent. In the next moment, red light burst forth from their bodies, and a faint layer of red enveloped them. This is the light of my laws. With it, you won't have to worry about the chaotic laws on the battlefield. Since we're here, let's show the Magi of the other large organizations whether we, the Magi of the Central Continent, are a bunch of trash. Chapter 1408. The higher the level of the battlefield, the more powerful the powerhouses could display their full potential. When Grimm charged into the front line, the entire battlefield was filled with a terrifying pressure that could shake one's soul. It was as if a huge rock had been thrown into a pot of boiling oil. In an instant, the entire battlefield was flipped over. Grimm's burning domain, which he hadn't used for a long time, was unleashed once again. Wherever the 1,000-meter-wide ring of flames went, everyone and everything started burning silently. The low-level wizards of the association were all hiding in a wizard's tower of war, so they didn't have to endure the terrifying flames. On the other hand, those shaman beasts and mutated beasts that were exposed to the outside instantly met with a tragedy. They were like a group of ants that were pressed onto a slab of lava and burned, and they didn't struggle for long before they exploded into torches that shot into the sky and were instantly incinerated into ashes. In Grimm's eyes, there was no difference between level 1 and level 2 creatures. Once they stepped into the burning domain and touched the ring of flames, only death awaited them. They didn't even have the time to struggle. Even the level 3 and 4 human wizards would have to bear the scorching heat of the burning domain if they didn't slap fire runes on themselves, let alone these low-level magical beasts. Grimm's 1,000-meter-tall fire giant moved forward, and the mutated beasts exploded into ashes like ants. Wherever the ring of flames extended, the sound of explosions could be heard. The black and red turbid flow that ruled over the entire land was instantly reduced to a sea of red. After burning the closest enemy to him, Grimm took the opportunity to slowly move forward. Wherever the ring of flames went, the mutated beasts that didn't know what fear was were scared out of their wits. They all retreated and hid. Thus, such a ridiculous scene appeared in a corner of the battlefield. A 1,000-meter-tall fire giant chased behind while the mutated beasts scattered in all directions. Some of the more powerful mutated beasts even revealed their sharp claws in order to fight for a path to escape, killing their companions in front of them. Those who escaped too late were caught up by the expanding ring of flames. They couldn't hold on for more than 3 seconds before exploding with a bang. Before the broken corpses, the splashing blood, and the broken bones hit the ground, they had already been blown into black, withered ashes by the terrifyingly hot torrents of fire, which scattered and filled the entire front line. The wizards from the Central Continent flew in front of Grimm and slowly moved forward together with the flame ring. They quietly looked down at the horrifying scene in front of them and below them that resembled a lava hell. Their hearts were extremely shocked and trembling. The majesty of a god, the power to destroy the world, the life and death of all ants, the will to live or die. Perhaps. Within this plane, the peak of a Magus power was only this much. Even a Tier 4 sorcerer would be shaken by such a terrifying might. So how could these lowly life forms withstand it? For a moment, the entire battlefield fell into a deathly silence. Only the shrill screams of the mutant beasts and the heart-shaking sounds of exploding flames could be heard. At the edge of the huge flame ring, the leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, stood with her head held high on a towering rank 4 zombie dragon. She looked at Grimm's huge, burning body from the side. There was no sadness or joy on her delicate and cold face, neither shock nor anger. Her entire body exuded a bone-chilling aura that kept strangers away. Behind her, the few Tier 4 witches were all shocked. This was the first time they had directly experienced the terrifying aura of a powerful magus. This was especially true for Circe and Angelina, the leader of the Deceit Witches, who had a grudge against Grimm in the past. Although they tried to remain calm, the flickering light in their eyes betrayed their inner thoughts. It seemed that when they first heard of Grimm's name, he was just a dispensable ant in their eyes, an ant that occasionally jumped out to annoy them. But now, their true status had undergone a shocking reversal. What were they compared to Grimm, who stood at the peak of the plane? The Silver Robe Alliance wizards were just as shocked as the Northern Witches. There was only one super powerful being in the entire Silver Alliance, and he had to stay in Sky City to prevent any accidents. Therefore, they did not have a super powerful being in their team this time. At this moment, when they saw the legendary fire wizard displaying his might, apart from being deeply shocked, they were also filled with endless envy. The few Tier 4 puppet masters looked at each other and sighed helplessly. They summoned their magic armored puppets, entered them, and roared as they rushed into the battlefield. In the Association's battle, Savorius turned around and stared at the terrifying fire god who looked like he could destroy the world. His body trembled like a sieve. He wasn't afraid, but he was filled with hatred and helplessness. His opponent was already so powerful. How could he wash away the humiliation he had suffered? In the towering wizard's pagoda, Gloria rushed to the huge light mirror and stared hatefully at her former opponent. Her shoulders trembled uncontrollably, and the surface of her body flickered with a purple light. She was obviously in a frenzy of anger. This is the legendary fire wizard who fought with you for 100 rounds. Behind him, a young male wizard with a slick face and a green robe chuckled and said, "Why do I feel that it's impossible? You think you can fight against such a terrifying guy with that little combat strength of yours? Don't tell me that his power has just increased. Humph. Among all the super powerful beings I've seen, there's not a single one who can lock the power of laws in advance as a Tier 4 wizard. Shut up, Amway. If you don't want to fight with me now, then shut the F***CK up." Gloria suddenly turned around, her anger erupting. She glared fiercely at Amway, wanting to tear him into pieces. Even in the face of the threat of a super powerful being, the young wizard Amway still had a carefree and cheeky look on his face. After all, he was the #1 super powerful being in the entire Wizard Association. Even if it was Gloria, she would not dare to easily attack him when she was in a rage. Although he appeared to be unconcerned at this moment, a trace of caution and fear involuntarily flashed deep within his eyes when his gaze landed on the imposing figure in the light mirror that was moving forward with great emotion. Damn it! When did such a terrifying newcomer appear in the wizard world? With this kind of power, if he were to fight with him, he might... Thinking of this, Amway did not dare to continue thinking about it. He was afraid that if he followed this train of thought, he would lose the confidence and courage to challenge the other party. In the control hall on the 17th level of the Wizard's Pagoda, Vice Chairman Domner stood silently, also looking at the terrifying power of the fire giant on the light screen. He could not help but let out a sigh. He could no longer suppress him. From now on, even he had to reconsider the way to interact with this legendary fire wizard in the Central Region. As long as this fire wizard was around, the Wizard Association's coveting of the Central Region would be futile. With the long lifespan of a super powerful being, if he were to occupy the Central Region for 1,000 years, he would definitely be able to develop it into a huge wizard organization that was not any weaker than the Wizard Association. When he thought about how the Wizard Association had become the second most powerful faction in his hands, suppressed by a weak organization for 1,000 years, even someone as calm as him could not help but feel his heart waver. 1,000 years. 1,000 years. Even for a rank 4 magus like him, this period of time was far too long. However, Grimm, who was on a killing spree on the battlefield, did not have the heart to care about the sinister gazes coming from all directions. He focused on his job of roasting monsters. Every mutated beast that entered the burning domain and was ignited by the ring of flames would consume a bit of the flame energy in Grimm's body. The flame energy might not be eye-catching on its own, but when it roamed the battlefield and burned more than 100 mutated beasts every second, it would be a huge burden to Grimm. If Grimm wanted to maintain such a huge body of flames and the shocking effect of the burning domain, he would have to expend a lot of energy on these cannon fodder. However, with the Vulcan orb providing him with a steady stream of pure flame energy, he would not feel tired even if he had to maintain the burning domain for 3 days and 2 nights. He had now become a star on the battlefield, attracting everyone's attention. No matter if it was good, bad, full of surprise, full of hatred, or something else, not a single wizard or creature of disaster could ignore his existence. Their minds and eyes were filled with the terrifying scene of him burning the heavens and destroying the earth with a wave of his hand. Clara and the other wizards of the Central Region had stepped onto the battlefield anxiously, thinking that it would be a fight to the death. However, following Grimm's flame ring, all the enemies were instantly turned into ashes before they could even get close to him. This kind of domineering and arrogant attitude of looking down on the enemies like ants was simply intoxicating. However, just because the ants couldn't rush over, it didn't mean that the disaster creatures couldn't. A few veteran wizards with rich experience in planar warfare warned in a low voice, "Be careful, the disaster creatures are coming." Before they could finish their words, a group of terrifying disaster creatures of different shapes emerged from the edge of the egg-shaped light screen in the distance. They roared and rushed into the burning domain, completely ignoring the golden flames on their bodies. They stepped on the void with all their might and pounced towards the wizards of the Central Region. "Prepare to face the enemy. Prepare to face the enemy," which Clara screamed loudly and waved the magic wand in her hand. Rays of black light instantly flew towards the enemies. Blindness, slow, weakness, aging, madness, loss of will. A series of dark curses and mysterious sealing spells entered the bodies of the disaster creatures. At the same time, voodoo puppets the size of a palm came out of which Clara's sleeve and circled around her. They kept playing and screaming, as if they were a group of living creatures. When the black light entered a disaster creature's body, Clara would randomly point at one of the voodoo puppets and shout, "Tendon break." In the next instant, the speed of the calamity creature that was over a kilometer away suddenly plummeted, and it looked as if it could no longer run. Chapter 1409. Matthew also summoned otherworldly creatures in a frenzy. Very quickly, the thick-skinned, human-faced snake, beholder, and devourer appeared from the void. The only physique refinement magus in the team, Declan, stepped forward without hesitation. With a roar, his body expanded from less than 2 meters to 4 meters tall, charging to the front of the team with an imposing manner. Another bloodline sorcerer, Ariza's body also quickly twisted and transformed into a strange lion with a human body. It was a strange creature that stood 3 meters tall, with a muscular humanoid body and a lion's head. The humanoid skin was yellowish-brown, and there was no hair on the surface. Its muscles were well-developed, and it looked rather fit. The strange lion's head on its neck had a large mouth with fangs, wide eyes, and a large nose. It looked exceptionally majestic. Although this lion-bodied creature was much more majestic than a human, it was like a tame kitten compared to the creatures of the calamity. It was obvious that it did not excel in strength or physique. After Ariza completed his transformation, he immediately rushed behind Declan and cast a series of bloodline witchcraft at him as fast as the wind. Charm Monster, Greater Illusion, Mirror Image, Suggestion, Perception Absorption, with Ariza's might as a grade 4 magus. Half of the bloodline spells he cast were negated by the calamity creatures. Only Greater Illusion and Perception Absorption succeeded in the remaining half. As a result, 2 of the disaster creatures that were charging at them were hit just like that. One of them suddenly flashed out and began to fight with a phantom that didn't exist. The other one suddenly turned around on the spot, as if it couldn't find its way. If Ariza and the Calamity creatures were the only ones in the battle today, such a method of confusing and trapping the enemy would not help him achieve victory. However, he was followed by a group of Grade 4 elemental magi who did not follow the normal path. Just as the two Calamity creatures were running around in circles, 3 shockingly powerful Grade 4 spells landed on their heads. Dimensional Sonic Wave spell. This was contributed by Lord Alfred of Molten City. Water Dragon Strangle. This was contributed by Nicholas. Nature's Wrath. This was contributed by Roderick. However, even if the 3 of them combined their rank 4 spells, it would not be able to match up to the meteorite that streaked across the sky. A crimson meteor with a diameter of 5 meters fell from the sky, bombarding the swarm of disaster creatures. The crimson meteorite immediately exploded and shattered, turning into thousands of pieces of burning lava fragments that flew in all directions, covering an area of several hundred meters. The violent shockwaves immediately made the group of disaster creatures a little dizzy, and the subsequent bombardment of lava rain and lava fragments was even more deadly. The 3 Type 4 Calamity creatures that were at the center of the explosion were instantly blasted full of holes, the flames quickly engulfing them. The disaster creatures that managed to escape in time were also affected. All of them were injured, and they fled the range of the rain of fire as if they were running for their lives. Even though they had suffered such a heavy blow, there were still 2 Calamity creatures that broke through the layers of spells and charged towards Declan, engaging him in battle. The other Calamity creatures also gathered, preparing to encircle this group of human magi who did not know what was good for them. Unfortunately, they were immediately attacked by Grimm's Berserk Fire spell. Fire spells had always been known as the king of the battlefield, and this was not without reason. Coupled with Grimm's power of law, the fire spell that had the effect of the inextinguishable flames became even more violent and ferocious. All the Calamity creatures that charged into the battle had to endure the continuous burning of the inextinguishable fire spell. They could only endure the pain and fight the human magi. This increased the burden on them, causing them to lose their rationality due to their rage. In truth, the Central Magi had sent out far more rank 4 Magi than the other 3 Magus organizations, but their results were nothing to write home about. When they fought against the Calamity creatures, they were mostly just tangling with them, and it was difficult for them to deal a fatal blow. After all, the Calamity creatures were cruel and tyrannical. If they were forced into a corner, the Magi would be in danger if they retaliated. It was precisely because they did not have the courage and determination to perish together with the enemy that the Magi were able to rampage on the battlefield, even though the Calamity creatures were riddled with scars and injuries. In contrast, the Magi of the Central Magi were gradually being suppressed by the Calamity creatures. To put it bluntly, the entire situation in the Central Continent was supported by Grimm alone. If Grimm did not do anything, the Magi of the Central Magi would have long since collapsed. Grimm stood at the back of the battle, using fire spells to support them as he sighed inwardly. The Central Magi were really weak. No matter how dissatisfied he was, Grimm could not allow his troops to be crushed by the Calamity creatures. After all, this concerned his reputation as a legendary fire magus. Chip, analyze the battlefield. I need to find a breakthrough point. Beep. Scanning the battlefield. Discover a total of 11 high-grade Calamity creatures and 24 rank 3 Calamity creatures. More detailed information is still being scanned. Beep. Magus Ariza is in danger. Location: XXX. 2 rank 4 Calamity creatures are surrounding him, requesting immediate assistance. Grimm, who was standing tall, threw out a lava fireball that exploded at a specific location on the battlefield. The violent and ferocious shockwave of flames immediately blew away the 2 Calamity creatures that were trying to surround Ariza, temporarily alleviating the danger he was in. Beep. Declan is currently being attacked by 3 calamity creatures. The enemy might break through at any time. Without a word, Grim raised his hands, and a pillar of scarlet flames shot into the sky 100 meters in front of Declan. The scarlet flames swept towards the enemies in the surroundings. The 3 rank 4 calamity creatures dodged in panic, and their attacks on Declan were slowed down. Magus Clara is too far away. A calamity creature is launching an invisible ambush. Grim's eyes brightened, and 2 thick golden streaks of flames swept across the horizon. When the streaks reached a place not too far away from Magus Clara, a strange demonic tiger with a pair of wings and a horn on its head leapt out of thin air, dodging Grim's attack by a hair's breadth. Seeing this, Magus Clara screamed and waved her hands rapidly. Immediately, numerous black and gray halos shot towards the demonic tiger's head. Upon seeing this, the opponent hurriedly leapt out of the attack's range, and the ambush ended in failure, relying on the Chip's all-encompassing surveillance and Grim's unstoppable flames of laws. The many rank for calamity creatures of the Central Continent went from being flustered at the start to being orderly. Very quickly, they got through the most difficult period of adjustment. When they realized that there was an ultimate being overseeing them and that they could fight freely without fear of dying, they naturally got rid of their worries. They began to think about how to work together and how to deal the greatest blow to the enemy. With tacit cooperation and mutual assistance, everyone would be able to unleash their full potential. Hence, with Grim's indirect and direct encouragement, the selfish rank for calamity creatures of the Central Continent finally abandoned their narrow-minded thoughts and began to wholeheartedly contribute their strength to the group. After all, they were rank 4 calamity creatures. Even a slight change in their mental outlook and battle style was reflected on the battlefield, as if they had been reborn. Alfred was an expert in sound wave spells, and was far stronger than his peers when it came to locating, scouting, and sensing invisible creatures. He took the initiative to stand out and act as the vanguard of the team, using tyrannical notes to disrupt the enemy's formation. This immediately gave Magus Clara, Matthew, and the others with weaker defenses an additional layer of protection. Nicholas was an expert in water spells, and he had the effects of mirror clone and water well teleportation. When he selflessly contributed his strength, all the members of the team had special effects such as water refraction, mirror clone, and so on. At the center of the team, a well-hidden and exquisite teleportation well appeared. If any member of the team sensed danger, they could use the teleportation well to run to another area and continue fighting. This was another way to escape from the enemy's pursuit and quickly move away. As for Wizard Roderick, he was an expert in plant-type spells. They could both attack and defend, and they also had powerful healing effects. Under his command, a large natural barrier enveloped the entire team. Any member of the team could touch the natural light within the barrier to recover their physical body and spiritual force to a certain extent. He also commanded a large number of creeper monsters to desperately block the attacks of the disaster creatures. In the past, the rank 4 calamity creatures of the Central Continent were too selfish. Even when they were fighting in a team, they rarely thought about their comrades, let alone using their own strength to strengthen and protect them. When they tried it for the first time, they quickly received positive feedback. The entire team became orderly in dealing with the calamity creatures, and with Grim patching up any gaps and using his powerful fire spells to cover for them, it was impossible for the battle to fall apart in an instant. With confidence and fighting spirit, the Central Continent Wizards had a much easier time fighting. Using the disaster creatures to train their troops, in every corner of the battlefield, there was always a group of people quietly watching the battle of the rank for calamity creatures of the Central Continent. The unimaginable scene in front of them left them speechless. They shook their heads and sighed. Chapter 14:10. If they could control the situation, it would be a heaven-defying move. If they couldn't, it would just be a tragic accident. Although everyone knew Grim's intention, They couldn't imitate him even if they wanted to. It was because they weren't strong enough. Grimm used his burning domain to isolate all the mutated beasts, which also prevented the mutated beasts and the disaster creatures from helping each other. If the disaster creatures wanted to attack the central wizards, they could only brace themselves and charge into Grimm's burning domain. Although the rank 4 disaster creatures had magic resistance, they wouldn't be burned to ashes by Grimm's burning domain. But the constant burning of the immortal flame was a huge burden to them. At least, they had to use 30% to 40% of their strength to resist the burning domain. That way, they wouldn't be able to attack the wizards with all their strength. What made the disaster creatures even angrier was the 1,000-meter-tall burning man standing far behind them, Grimm. Every time the disaster creatures organized a fierce attack, Grimm would throw a huge fireball at them from afar. In order to avoid the flames, the formation of the calamity creatures collapsed and became difficult to regroup. The disaster creatures couldn't gather their strength into a fist, but on the other side, the rank 4 wizards from the central wizards were getting more and more proficient. They had already begun to form a team. Under the influence of many factors, the rank 4 wizards from the central wizards had already killed 2 rank 4 and 6 rank 3 vicious beasts. Such a huge success had undoubtedly stimulated their fighting spirit and confidence. Even those who had grudges and disagreements with each other in the past had begun to cooperate and fight together in a proper manner. This brought more and more pressure to the disaster creatures. The battle on the battlefield was intense, but the group of lesser disaster lords hiding in the fog in the valley were already arguing. They weren't blind or deaf. Just from the familiar aura, they could link the 1,000-meter-tall fire giant to the burning will that caused the law to fluctuate. This was obviously a rank 4 wizard who had the power of a rank 5 wizard. Just digesting this information had drained the lesser disaster lords of all their strength, not to mention how they were going to deal with this huge fiery figure. Their main bodies might be very powerful in the outer realm, but once they entered the sorcerer world, the upper limit of their strength would be limited to the pinnacle of grade 4. If they were to suddenly encounter such a powerful magus with super-ranked methods, perhaps all of the lesser lords present would be in danger of dying here. Those low-tier mutated beasts might not have intelligence, but these high-tier life forms had terrifying intelligence that matched their status and level. Naturally, they were unwilling to pay such a price that did not make up for the loss. Hence, how to fight this terrifying fire wizard became the center of their intense discussion. Some did not believe it, and thought that the fire wizard was just an empty shell. As long as a few lesser disaster lords worked together to launch a surprise attack on him, they would be able to kill him on the battlefield. There were also lesser disaster lords who suggested sending a few of their companions to keep the fire wizard busy while they looked for a way out from the other wizards. However, in that case, the biggest problem was who was going to hold back the fire wizard. After much pushing and shoving, this difficult and arduous task fell to the strongest powerhouse, Five Faces, as expected. Five Faces was a terrifying multi-headed snake lizard, also at the pinnacle of grade 4 strength. In the previous battle with the Sorcerer Association, it had fought 1 against 3 of the association's super powerhouses, forcing them to retreat. Now that it was the legendary Fire Wizard, they all agreed on the same thing. There were a total of 5 pinnacle grade 4 lesser disaster lords present, each of them possessing terrifying might and the power of laws that others could not compare to. Now that the human sorcerers were launching a large-scale attack, with the intention of driving them out of the sorcerer world in one go, these ruthless lesser disaster lords naturally had to prepare for a strong counterattack. After the discussion was over, the lesser disaster lords immediately recalled their subordinates on the battlefield and rushed out of the valley with heavy steps without hesitation. This movement on the battlefield immediately attracted the attention of all the sorcerer organizations. All the sorcerers at the front retreated and regrouped. Seeing this, the 7 grade 4 sorcerers in the middle hurriedly retreated and hovered beside Grimm's tall and imposing figure, waiting for his instructions. After the edification of this battle, everyone completely understood. Without Grimm's support, the sorcerers of the central region were nothing in this planar battlefield. If they wanted to survive, they had to cling on to Grimm's thigh. At the critical moment, only Grimm had the ability to rescue them from the jaws of the ferocious creatures of disaster. As for his so-called companions, they were already lucky enough to be able to protect themselves. Ignoring the wild imaginations of the Central Region sorcerers, the moment the lesser disaster lords appeared, the Sorcerer Association also made a big move. Hundreds of human sorcerers flew out from the Wizard's Pagoda at the back of the battlefield, with the Grade 4 sorcerers in the center, led by Domner. Looks like they can't wait to fight us. Grimm slowly stepped forward and transmitted his voice. When the battle starts, don't get too close, and don't leave the range of my flame halo. Be careful. Upon hearing the voice transmission, the Magi of the Central Continent immediately regained their confidence and gathered around Grimm, looking like loyal guards. Only the scheming Clara, Alfred, and a few others frowned, not daring to get too close to Grimm. They knew in their hearts that once the battle started, Grimm would definitely be the main force of the human sorcerers. At that time, Grimm's surroundings would be one of the most dangerous places on the battlefield. Thus, whether they were close or far away from Grimm would be a test of their eyesight and awareness of the battlefield situation. The group held their breaths, silently sizing up the terrifying creatures that had emerged from the depths of the Dark Ink Valley. The more they looked, the deeper their frowns became. In the end, all the sorcerers' brows were tightly knitted, their hearts filled with worry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Damn it, there are 5 peak grade 4 creatures of disaster. This battle is not going to be easy. The biggest difference between ordinary creatures of disaster and lesser disaster lords was whether or not they had the halo of disaster. The halo of disaster referred to the light of a domain condensed from the power of laws. As long as one stepped into the domain, they would be attacked by the terrifying power of laws. As for the power of laws, only grade 4 sorcerers who had grasped the power of laws could withstand it. As for sorcerers below grade 4, they were like helpless rabbits in front of the power of laws. The only difference between them and ordinary mortals was that they would die a little slower and suffer a little more pain. Apart from that, there was no difference. At the front of the line was a multi-headed snake lizard with 5 weird heads. Its body was densely covered in dark green scales, and its 4 short, thick legs supported its huge and bloated body. The 5 raised heads were concentrated in the front half of the head, and each of them was facing a different direction. Lord Grimm, it looks like we'll have to work together. Do you see that multi-headed serpentine lizard? It's called 5 Faces. The scales on its 5 heads are of different colors, and they all have different elemental attributes. The red one is fire, the white one is hurricane, the blue one is ice, and the brown one is rock. The main head in the middle is green, which means that its main attribute is poison. Domner was obviously trying to rope Grimm in, and he pointed at the multi-headed serpentine lizard in the distance while introducing it to him with a solemn expression. Grimm's towering figure stopped at the center of the battlefield, his expression calm as he observed the powerful enemy in front of him. While Domner's introduction was useful to him, it was not as detailed and comprehensive as what he had experienced personally. That multi-headed serpentine lizard was most likely a grade 5 creature. It was only because it was in the Magus world that its strength was suppressed to the peak of grade 4. Such a fellow's physique and understanding of laws far surpassed the limits of a grade 4 Magus, and could even suppress ordinary powerful beings. Grimm sensed the existence of a strange power of law on its body that was close to 100 meters long. AI, Chip, can you detect the basic attributes of its laws? Beep. Information gathering complete. Target creature, 5 faces. Target rank, grade 5, can only display peak grade 4 strength in the plane. Target race, serpentine lizard. Target's basic attributes, strength greater than 45. Agility greater than 18. Vitality greater than 52. Spirit greater than 48. Calamity Halo, power of laws poison plus force of disaster. Poison is the main attribute of the target creature, and force of disaster is the basic attribute that all calamity creatures share. A host has to guard against the invasion of these two laws when fighting, especially the latter, which can corrupt the host's spiritual force and cause the host to gradually lose control of the law of fire. Method of protection. Book of Darkness. Host has to be enveloped by the light of laws of the Book of Darkness at all times. Once the light of laws is broken, the host's own law of fire can protect his spiritual force for 11 seconds. More than 11 seconds, and the host's spiritual force may be corrupted. Hearing the AI chip's analysis, Grimm could not help but frown and grumble. Law of two elements? Just that poison alone is troublesome enough. Why do I need to resist the force of disaster as well? If it can obtain the power of disaster, won't there be any response from the plane's conscience if I fight here? Beep. Establish communication with a high-level consciousness. High energy flow detected. Requesting host's instructions to interrupt? Damn, interrupt what? This is a free blessing from the plane. Connect immediately. In the next second, Grimm's consciousness seemed to be immersed in a warm stream of water. A strange energy flowed in from the void plane and fused with his own law of fire, turning into a strange power of law. Chapter 14:11. The power of calamity was not the same as the aura of calamity. Any powerful creature that came from the calamity plane would have a lingering aura of calamity in their flesh, blood, hair, bones, and teeth. Wherever they passed, the aura of calamity would contaminate matter and the mind, causing the environment there to slowly move closer to the calamity plane. This aura of calamity was a mark unique to the calamity plane. The power of calamity was the power of the world, a mark that the calamity plane left in the souls of powerful creatures. This power was not inherent to the creatures of the calamity plane, but a portion of the calamity plane's world force that they used to borrow the power of chaos. Those that could use the power of calamity were the top creatures of the calamity plane, and the density of the power of calamity in their bodies represented how much the plane cared for them. Correspondingly, the lesser calamity lords could use the power of calamity to strengthen themselves. Grimm, who fought on his own, would naturally enjoy the favor of the Magus world's consciousness. Hence, with the AI chip as a bridge, Grimm's consciousness probed into the plane of laws, vaguely making contact with the vast and chaotic consciousness of the Magus world. In the next second, a torrent of energy that he had never felt before surged into Grimm's consciousness, making him feel warm all over as if he had returned to his mother's womb. This torrent not only gave Grimm a deeper understanding of the laws of the world and the laws of the plane, but also a deep hatred towards these invaders. This time, he had no choice but to fight. Grimm, who had turned into a 1,000-meter-tall giant, took a step forward and bent down towards the dark mass of calamity creatures in the distance, letting out a deafening roar. Get out of this world. This was not what Grimm wanted to say, but a roar that he had involuntarily let out after absorbing the power of the Magus world. This roar represented the extreme hatred and disgust of the Magus world's consciousness towards these invaders, as well as the rejection and hatred of the Magus world's power towards the power of calamity that they had brought with them. After roaring this sentence, Grimm's 1,000-meter-tall crimson flame body suddenly emitted a blinding golden radiance, illuminating the entire battlefield in a golden light. Bathed in this golden radiance, all the wizards present had a layer of golden halo condensed on their bodies. With the protection of this golden halo, the Magi no longer had to worry about being infected by the power of calamity. While the wizards were checking the attributes of the golden glow, Grimm had already taken the lead. He condensed a golden fireball the size of a mountain in his hands and hurled it towards the enemy camp. Bastard, this is the power of the world. Gloria gnashed her teeth. Domner could not help but sigh again. He can already activate the world power, which means that he has been acknowledged by the wizard will cough. Although Domner did not finish his words, All the wizards of the association could feel what he was trying to convey. This was their main battlefield, but an outsider had actually stolen the limelight of the main character. They were even more miserable. They had actually been reduced to a bunch of bystanders, small fries. Thinking of this, they felt extremely disgusted, as if they had eaten a plate of flies. Many of the association's magi were even secretly cursing the bias of the wizard will. However, no matter how unwilling they were and how much they complained, as the Magus world's power penetrated their minds, they felt the same as Grimm. From the depths of their hearts and souls, hatred and disgust towards the creatures of calamity surged. As such, the ordinary grade 4 magi roared and charged forward as if they had seen their enemies from their past lives. Only the super powerhouses at the peak of grade 4 could use the power of laws to protect their minds and not be completely bewitched by the power of the world. They did not lose their minds and charge forward to fight with their lives on the line. However, just by looking at their increasingly bloodshot eyes, one could tell that no matter how strong their willpower was, they would not be able to hold on for long. Looks like the plane's consciousness has already sensed the threat of the creatures of calamity. It's urging us to chase the enemy away as soon as possible. Domner sighed. The plane's consciousness is really profiteering. Seeing that Grimm is stronger than us, it directly transferred the plane's blessing to him. The young wizard Onley, who had just returned from the depths of the galaxy, could not help but laugh. Domner, it's not your first day in contact with the plane's consciousness. It has always been like this. It's just that when it looked after you in the past, it gave you the illusion that you were the ruler of this world. That's why you're so disappointed now. Haha, when you go to the depths of the galaxy and visit a few more plane consciousnesses, you'll understand that they're much more realistic and profiteering than humans. All right, I'm not going to chat with you guys anymore. I'm going to charge forward for a while and accumulate more plane feedback. That thing is a top-notch resource. With that, a violent and fierce aura that was not any weaker than Grimm's rose from Onley's body, and his entire body rushed to the front of the battlefield with a thunderous roar. I'm going to. You be careful. Gloria once again glared at the indomitable figure of the violent fire giant at the end of her line of sight. She threw this sentence at Domner, and a mysterious purple light, as thick as armor, surrounded her body as she also rushed into the battlefield. Although Domner was a grade 4, he was not good at fighting. Thus, he suppressed the surging battle intent in his heart and silently observed the battlefield. There were 5 peak grade lesser lords of disaster on the other side, and there were as many as 7 super powerful beings on the other side. The situation was still quite balanced. However, the legendary fire wizard Grimm was in a special state, and he had the blessing of the plane's consciousness. It should not be a problem for him to crush the ordinary lesser lords of disaster. Looking at it this way, the other side still had a huge advantage. While Domner was silently calculating under the protection of the wizard's pagoda, the northern witches also began to move. On the back of the zombie dragon, the leader of the deceit witches, Angelina, could not help but step forward and ask, Lady Thuna, the association and the central continent have already gone up. What do you think we? As she spoke, her body trembled slightly, and a red light burst from her eyes. It was obvious that she was using her powerful spiritual will to fight against the surging battle intent in the depths of her soul. The other 3 grade 4 witches behind her were in a similar situation, barely suppressing the boiling battle intent in their hearts. Thuna, who stood proudly on the zombie dragon's head, was silent for a moment and finally spoke. The plane's consciousness is already angry, but we can't lose our rationality. Fighting is a must, but how you fight depends on your own heart. Let's go, and let us fight to our heart's content with these detestable creatures of disaster. Hearing her declaration of battle, the eyes of the northern witches turned red at the same time, and a wild and tyrannical battle intent burst forth from their bodies. The huge zombie dragon spread its wings, and with a low, hoarse, and terrifying dragon roar, it pounced towards the front line where the flames of war had suddenly erupted. As for the Silver Alliance, they did not have any powerful beings to hold the line. Even a powerful magus like Meloni could not resist the temptation of the plane's consciousness. As soon as Grimm launched his attack, he had already roared and led the Alliance's magi to charge forward. The entire battlefield instantly entered a state of white-hot war. The whole battle was indeed started by Grimm, but his body was too large. Even though he was throwing flames while taking large strides forward, the Association's magi still managed to arrive before him. This was a battle between high-rank creatures. There was no room for mid-rank and low-rank creatures to intervene at all, not to mention Grimm's heaven-defying burning domain. Just the aftermath of a battle between two high-rank creatures was enough to crush low-rank creatures with insufficient strength into powder. Therefore, the entire battlefield was filled with Grade 4 creatures. There were no creatures below Grade 4. Multi-headed snake lizards, multi-armed giants, giant winged serpents, evil sand spirits, 10-headed ghosts. The 5 lesser disaster lords each took up a position, leading their Tier 4 subordinates as they charged at the human magi. Grimm's golden eyes, which were as large as mountains, immediately locked onto the strongest multi-headed snake lizard, the 5-faced serpent. The latter's 5 raised serpent heads stared at Grimm in unison, and the depths of its 10 differently colored serpent eyes emitted a sinister and twisted glint. "Go to hell, ugly freak." Grimm condensed 2 large fireballs from afar and frantically poured energy into them. Now, his body was surging with the boundless law of fire and the mysterious force of the world. The two combined to form a strange and powerful force that even the AI chip could not analyze at the moment. The AI chip's energy projection showed that the energy within the fireballs continued to rise, breaking through many boundaries that even Grimm could not imagine. 8,000 degrees, 9,000 degrees, 10,000 degrees. When the energy level of the fireballs reached 10,000 degrees, the crimson light that they emitted was restrained, turning into a translucent milky white. This time, even the 5-faced Hydra lizard became a little anxious. One had to know that in the sorcerer world, a normal rank 4 sorcerer could only reach the energy level of 2,000 to 3,000. Even the powerful Gloria could only reach the level of 7,000. And now, Grimm could casually condense a fireball that could reach 10,000 degrees. This was clearly beyond the limits of the Magus world. If not for the force of the world opening a backdoor for him, Grimm would not have been able to achieve this even if he had another 1,000 years. Sensing the terrifying might of the berserk fireball in his hands, Grimm roared and threw it without hesitation. Chapter 14:12. Sensing the terrifying energy within the 2 fireballs, the multi-headed Hydra lizard's face turned pale with fright. The 5 snake-like and dragon-like heads that were raised high up in the air opened their mouths and spat out energy balls of 5 different colors with all their might. Finally, the 2 fireballs were blown up by the 2 fireballs when they were halfway through the air. The fireballs were first restrained, then all the flames erupted at the same time, forming a huge flaming mushroom cloud at the front of the battlefield. Terrifying energy radiation and shockwaves of shockwaves swept through the surroundings, vaporizing everything within the range of the flames, leaving behind a deep pit with a diameter of 500 meters. The sorcerers and other creatures of disaster that had been locked in a fierce battle at the center of the battlefield fled in all directions with faces full of fear. No one dared to get involved in the direct confrontation between the 2 supreme beings. Flennen? Kambadu, Mother of Flames. Grimm quickly chanted a strange spell and summoned a huge cloud of fire. The cloud of fire engulfed the area where his opponent was like cotton candy. However, in the next moment, a green poisonous aura pierced through the cloud of fire and appeared in front of everyone. The power of poison and the power of fire intertwined and destroyed each other in a frenzy, corroding the plane and filling it with green, terrifying venom. The multi-headed Hydra lizard that was shrouded in the cloud of fire came out with earth-shaking steps. It could be seen that a few of the scales on the multi-headed Hydra lizard's body had been burnt black, and there were still a few places that still had golden sparks. The poisonous main head of the five-faced Hydra lizard stared at Grim without moving. The other heads turned around and spat out different colored violent energy, instantly annihilating the remaining inextinguishable flames. However, the part of its body that was destroyed was scorched black and withered, obviously affected by the power of laws. This kind of inextinguishable flames might be useful against enemies who had not grasped the power of laws, but for the five-faced Hydra lizard, as long as he was willing to pay a small price, he could easily extinguish it. One of them was a 1,000-meter-tall man of fire, while the other was a 100-meter-tall serpent lizard. Both of them were extremely large, and the moment they clashed, the earth would shake and the mountains would shake. In addition, both of them had the power of the law protecting them. When the terrifying poison halo and the violent flame halo collided, the law ripples created became even more terrifying killing weapons. The Tier 4 sorcerers and calamity creatures that had fled 1,000 meters away were scared out of their wits when they turned around to look. They immediately lowered their heads and ran for their lives. Although the other super powerhouses and lesser disaster overlords could also stand in the law ripples, the power they could unleash would still be somewhat affected. Therefore, even they could only furrow their brows and do their best to move the battlefield to a further area. The main battlefield closest to the valley was left to Grim and Penta, who were engaged in a fierce battle. In order to face Grim head-on, the multi-headed serpent lizard swallowed large mouthfuls of void energy. Its body swelled up several times and was now barely able to reach the fire giant's waist. Immediately after, its 5 snake heads quickly summoned magical energy and condensed a layer of rock armor on the surface of its body. Then, it condensed layers of ice shield on its side. Finally, it cast hurricane shield and wave shield on itself. After all the elemental energy it could use had been used, Pinna swayed its fat body and pounced at the fire giant, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. The two colossal creatures tangled together. Poison, flames, ice, rocks, hurricanes, huge waves. All sorts of magical energy clashed and destroyed each other, turning the world into a mess. Their powerful mental strength even tore through space, creating a massive mental storm. The multi-headed serpent lizard was indeed a powerful creature known for its strength and physique. Its 5 heads coiled around Grim's body, ignoring the burning flames. They opened their huge mouths and tore the flames. Grim, on the other hand, had gone berserk. The heat emitted from his body of flame had reached an astonishing level. The skin of the 5-faced body that was entangled with him had been scorched, and the smell of burnt flesh assailed everyone's nostrils. In his body, the light of law released by the Book of Darkness condensed into a thin layer of light, covering the surface of his body. Although this layer of light was as thin as a cicada's wing, it was able to resist the attacks of Penta. However, no matter how strong the protection of law was, it could not withstand the brutal attacks of a ferocious beast. Its 5 sharp teeth bit through the light layer and poured waves of elemental energy into Grim's body. The elemental energy contained the aura of its soul. To Grim, who had a pure physique of fire, it was no different from an unparalleled poison. Grim endured the intense pain in his body. He clenched his mountain-like flaming hand into a fist and smashed it heavily on the serpent heads. Golden flames condensed in his eyes, shooting out rays of golden light that crisscrossed the bodies of his enemies, leaving crisscrossing wounds that went deep into the bones. The violent flame energy condensed by the divine fire bead surged out from his hand and turned into waves of golden flames that wrapped around Penna's body, burning it fiercely. The multi-headed serpent lizard was also in great pain, but did not give up. It used all its strength to tear off pieces of flame from Grim's body and threw them to the edge of the battlefield. The flames were Grim, and Grim was the flames. Grim's body was over 1,000 meters long, but he was still at a disadvantage when entangled by the 5-headed serpent. His physique was even better. It was at its lowest point and had not recovered to its peak. Therefore, he was not a match for his opponent at all. Since he could not get rid of his opponent, he would see who was more ruthless. Grim endured the intense pain and pushed the power of the divine fire bead and book of darkness to the extreme, madly burning his opponent's body with flames. Just like that, both sides were locked in a stalemate in the center of the battlefield. They were equally matched. Although they were equally matched, both sides had suffered heavy losses. Grim's body of flame was clearly not strong enough, and he was torn to pieces by the serpent. It was a tragic sight to behold. As for the multi-headed serpent lizard, it was enduring the most painful and terrifying torment it had experienced in thousands of years. Its body, its serpent heads, its huge legs were almost cooked by Grim. Even in the midst of the most intense battle, Penta could smell the burnt smell coming from its body. The skin and flesh on the surface of its body had already been charred, and the slightest touch would cause large chunks of flesh to fall off. Its internal organs, tendons, and bones were also half-cooked. It felt as if thousands of needles were stabbing into it, causing it so much pain that it wished it was dead. Fifth Face was rather doubtful that he would be able to find a single piece of good flesh on his body after this battle was over. Oh heavens! How can there be such a supreme magus in the sorcerer world? Weren't they banished to the outer realm? Nair, Ramsey, multi-armed, you bastards, come and help me. I'm going to be roasted to a crisp by him. As it fought, Penna raised its serpent head high and let out a shrill hiss. This was the native language of the disaster plane, and only noble, high-ranking creatures like them had the right to master it. Unfortunately, its pitiful cries for help could not move its stone-hearted companions. They turned a deaf ear to the human magi and continued to fight, unwilling to get involved in the great battle between two supreme creatures. Though they boasted of their strength in the sorcerer world before they were tainted by the power of disaster, the maximum strength they could display was only that of a peak rank for magus. Using this kind of power to fight a superior sorcerer who had obviously surpassed the limits of the realm. To put it bluntly, only a fellow like Five Face, who was blinded by his own power, would do such a thing. Even the strongest among them, Penta, had ended up in such a pitiful state after fighting the legendary fire magus. If they were to go, they would probably be in a worse state. Though invading the sorcerer world was important, it was not so important that they would have to pay with their lives. As a result, the four lesser disaster overlords and the human magi fought further and further away. They had already run to the outskirts of the deep Ink Valley, leaving enough space for the two on the main battlefield to fight. Though he was in the midst of the most intense battle, Grim was still rapidly communicating with the AI chip in his mind. Beep. Flame body damaged by 26%, close to serious injury. Flame energy dissipated by 17%. Attack power is decreasing, estimated to fall below 10,000 degrees in 23 seconds. Estimated target still has 67% of its combat ability and is still a threat to host. Suggested host to use demonic fish transformation and use the astral beast bloodline to devour the opponent. Estimated success rate of devouring is 37%. Also, for every 1% reduction in combat ability, the success rate of devouring will increase by 2%. Demonic fish transformation can't be used. That's a killing move I've left for my predetermined enemies. I can't waste it on this bastard of disaster. Tell me, if we continue like this, will it give up first, or will I? Grim calmly rejected the chip suggestion. Beep. Based on the current situation, the target is estimated to be able to last for 127 seconds, while the host can only last for 89 seconds. The host's body will collapse first, and the poison will invade it. The AI chip's reply was cruel. Though the laws of fire that Grim could control were much stronger than his opponent's, he was completely suppressed by his opponent in terms of vitality. Although his opponent was heavily injured, he was able to last longer than him. Then there's no need to hesitate. Activate Scorched Earth. Beep. Command received. Scorched Earth is being activated. Chapter 14:13. It was a strange and mysterious world. The sky was dark red. The land was covered in terrifying volcanoes of varying heights. These volcanoes were unusually active and violent, with thick pillars of black smoke rising from the tall volcanic cones. Due to the continuous influx of black smoke, even the dark red and gloomy sky was covered by thick, rolling black clouds. Viscous, scarlet magma flowed all over the exposed lava, forming pools of lava of various sizes in various low-lying areas. In each lava pool, there were groups of flaming creatures frolicking, playing, and swimming in them. At the center of this world, an unusually majestic Mount Doomsday towered high above. The tip of the volcanic cone had even sunk into the rolling black clouds in the sky, revealing most of its majestic body that alternated between black and red. The volcano of Doomsday was still active. The rumbling undercurrent of the volcano was like muffled thunder that became the never-ending background music of this world. At the edge of the volcano were tens of thousands of powerful flame creatures, all of them at the fourth order and above. Many of them had even reached the fifth order. Without exception, they gathered near the small flame altars at the foot of the volcano, meditating and praying day and night. They even formed patrol squads to prevent non-flaming creatures from approaching their sacred mountain. But today, just as they were carrying out their routine prayers, the majestic sacred mountain that pierced the clouds suddenly erupted with a world-shaking roar. Divine Fire Pearl. I smell the divine fire pearl. Who is so bold as to steal my treasure? Violent sound waves surged between heaven and earth, instantly dispersing the dark clouds that covered an area of 5,000 kilometers above the sacred mountain. The majestic body of the Mount Doomsday was revealed to the countless believers for the first time. Wherever the terrifying sound waves passed, the earth would crack and volcanoes would erupt. The entire world would tremble because of it. Not only did the flaming creatures that lived in this kingdom not panic, they instead obediently prostrated themselves, silently praising the great god of fire Renai. In front of the largest flame altar at the foot of the sacred mountain, a 5-meter-tall giant made of fire knelt devoutly and asked with a droning voice, "Master, what has made you so angry? Your most devout servant, Arish, awaits your orders." This giant made of fire was a terrifying being who had reached grade 5. Suddenly roused from her slumber, the god of fire Renai vented the rage in her heart before slowly withdrawing her tyrannical divine force. Only then did the tens of thousands of volcanoes within the Fire Divine Kingdom's territory stop, erupting and trembling. They started to calm down. I remember now. My Vulcan bead was stolen by a bunch of despicable magi. Arish, I just sensed the presence of the Vulcan bead. The rank 5 divine spell, Scorched Earth, that I sealed inside has been activated. Immediately send someone to investigate. If they find the whereabouts of the magus who stole the fire god's orb or the thief, send the plane's waymark back. These reckless fellows. I'll send a clone to raze their world to the ground. Yes, my master. Everything will be as you wish. Having received the order, the grade 5 giant made of fire, Arish, turned and left the kingdom of fire, teleporting to another plane that belonged to the god of fire Renai. Here, she presided over the great temple and sent out the god of fire's oracle to dozens of secondary planes. As a result, these huge forces that belonged to the fire god shrine immediately took action and began to search for Grimm and the specific information regarding the fire god bead. What they didn't expect, however, was that this inadvertent effort, which was akin to finding a needle in a haystack, was a huge success. An anonymous wandering lich provided the god of fire temple with a valuable lead. Thus, the god of fire temple immediately turned their attention to a planar war in the Magus world. It was as if the aura of the divine fire pearl had leaked out from there. Scorched Earth, a grade 5 divine spell. This was a powerful divine spell sealed within the divine fire pearl. It was said that this was the first grade 5 divine spell created by the god of fire Renai after she became a god. As for its power, one could guess a thing or two from the tragic fate of the Hydra's serpent. This time, Pentamian was really miserable. Although its body was grade 5, its strength was suppressed to the peak of grade 4 in the Magus world. This also gave the human wizards, who it usually didn't care about, a chance to touch and hurt it. Of course, its strength was limited, but its powerful grade 5 physique was still there. Killing a peak grade 4 human magus was not a problem. Unfortunately, it was really unlucky. First of all, it encountered Grimm, who was also a very strange existence. His spiritual force had not even reached the peak of grade 4, but he had strangely grasped a powerful law of fire. This was something unimaginable in most of the planes. Moreover, Grimm had 2 grade 5 divine weapons to protect him. Thanks to the Fire God's Pearl and the Book of Darkness, Grimm had been able to tank the Tier 5 Lesser Disaster Lord's berserk attacks and hold his own against it. He had even gained the upper hand. Most importantly, Grimm was able to use the rank 5 divine fire spell, Scorched Earth, sealed in the Vulcan Orb. This was the crux of Pentamian's misfortune. Even with Penafe's strength, the Tier 5 Divine Flame spell had landed on Aqua Rose's body. Despite Aqua Rose's strength, the Tier 5 Flame Divine Flame spell had crumbled instantly. The violent fire divine spell surged into the 5-faced face's body, colliding and destroying everything within it without restraint. Its massive body, which had expanded to 400 meters in size, instantly turned bright red. It was as if a doomsday volcano had been shoved into Pentamian's body. Endless flames and magma were about to burst out. The snake's scales on the surface of its body shook and swelled like the earth, and terrifying scarlet flames shot out from the gaps between the scales. Through the swollen, almost transparent skin, one could see that what was flowing inside was no longer blood, but thick, boiling, dark red magma. With nowhere to vent the terrifying power of the flames, it rampaged through its body, causing 4 of the 5 snake heads to explode into a bloody paste. The remaining main serpent's head also lost an eyeball, leaving behind a ghastly bloody hole. "Save me, near, multi-armed. Save me. I'm going to die." Pentamian, who was tortured to death by the grade 5 divine fire spell, could no longer care about Grimm. It turned around and fled towards Ink Abyss Valley. As it fled, terrifying bloody holes appeared on its body one after another. What came out of the holes was not blood or organs, but hot flames and viscous magma. Even with such a huge body, with such a terrifying rate of loss, it was afraid that it would be burned to ashes by the internal fire before it could escape the sorcerer world. The other 4 lesser disaster lords were similarly shocked. Although they could tell that the mythic fire shaman was difficult to deal with, they never thought that a Tier 5 lesser disaster lord would fail to take care of a Tier 4 human sorcerer. Not only that, but the fire shaman had even forced the Tier 5 lesser disaster lord to flee, vomiting blood. After all, the multi-headed serpent lizard, 5-faced, was already the strongest among them. If even it could not stop the legendary fire shaman, then the rest of them would be in danger. If the lips were gone, the teeth would be cold. For the first time, the lesser calamity overlords felt a great chill from the bottom of their hearts. Could it be that this invasion of the Magus world was a journey to their deaths? Without hesitation, the lesser disaster lords turned around and followed Pentamian into the depths of Ink Abyss Valley. Thus, chase after chase unfolded in every corner of the battlefield. Trying to escape now? It's too late. Grimm, who stood tall in the middle of the battlefield, roared. He had paid such a heavy price. If he let the enemy escape, it would be a huge loss. Grimm strode forward and grabbed at the air with one hand, gathering large clumps of flame energy from the air. Under his skilled control, the energy transformed into a meter-thick flaming chain that tore through the air and wrapped around Pentamian's fleeing body. Dong. The flaming chain straightened, and Grimm's massive flaming body slid forward as the Hydra frantically tried to escape. No matter how hard he tried, he could not stop his body from sliding towards the crack in the valley. Declan, Clara, quick, help me! Grim shouted as he pulled with all his might. I'm coming, I'm coming. At the end of the horizon, Declan and a few wizards from the central continent rushed over like the wind. They all helped Grim to stop the crackling flame chain. With the help of Declan, a rank 4 refinement sorcerer, the Hydra lizard's frantic escape was finally stopped. The crack in the valley was less than 100 meters away, but its massive body was being held back by a group of human magi, unable to move forward. As more and more sorcerers joined in, the five-face was dragged further and further away from the rift, leaving deep scratches on the ground. Pentamian finally let out an ear-piercing shriek of despair and fear. Asterisk bang bang bang. Asterisk the dense fog dispersed, and the earth trembled. 3 similarly large and malevolent figures landed at the edge of the crack in the valley. They were Pentamian's companions. Seeing them was like seeing his savior, and the venomous head of Pentamian screamed with all its might. Save me, multi-armed. If you save me, I'll give you all the plains under me. Pentamian's cry for help was directed at the multi-armed giant with more than 10 arms. Its body was riddled with wounds, and it had barely escaped the pursuit of the magi of the association. Hearing Pentamian's cry for help, the multi-armed giant was stunned. Just as it was considering whether to save Pentamian, Grim had already let go of the flaming chain and rushed towards the crack in the valley with large strides. Multi-Arm's expression changed, and it glanced fearfully at Grim's majestic flaming body. Finally, it ignored everything else and plunged into the fog, disappearing without a trace. Bastard, seeing this, Pentamian fell into despair. Chapter 14:14. Five Faces was dead. It had to be said that the death of a rank 5 creature brought an incomparable shock to the battlefield. In the world of gods, a rank 5 creature was already at the level of a deity that had transcended the mundane. Killing a rank 5 creature usually meant slaying a god. Of course, if that was the case, Five Faces could only be called an evil demon at best. But no matter what it was called or how it was judged, it was a rank 5 creature through and through, equivalent to the lowest level of deities. To any plane, it was a high-level life form that had transcended the boundaries of the plane and escaped the control of the laws of the plane. If there were no accidents, the lifespan of a rank 5 creature would start from 10,000 years. Their bodies were immortal, and their souls were incredibly powerful. Under normal circumstances, creatures of the plane would be injured just by looking at the light on their bodies, much less bring harm or death to them. And such an existence had actually died in the sorcerer world at the hands of a Tier 4 sorcerer. This shock left the wizards at the scene numb, and they were left speechless. Unknowingly, everyone looked at Grim's 1,000-meter-tall body of flames with a tinge of respect and envy that they themselves could not detect. This was probably the limit of a rank 4 wizard's power. In the distance, beneath the wizard's pagoda, Domner sighed once again. For some reason, he had sighed more often than he had in the past 100 years. Five Faces is dead. Pass this news to Sir Onake of the Assorted Camp and Sir Li Hua of the Endless Garden. I believe they will be interested in this news. After adjusting his emotions, Domner immediately contacted someone in the wizard's pagoda through a secret channel. Soon, the message was stealthily transmitted to the Overwatch Tower, and then to several great wizards who maintained close ties with the Sorcerer Association through the interplanar teleportation formation there. On the battlefield, the young wizard Only gently floated to the side of the pale Gria and said in a low voice, "I don't plan on provoking this fellow. Our previous agreement is voided. You don't have any objections, right?" Gloria's body shook when she heard this, but she did not refute or reprimand him. Wizard Only glanced at her with sympathy, turned around, and squeezed out a smile. Then, with a face full of smiles, he slowly flew towards the legendary fire wizard who was standing proudly. It was time to greet the other party and get to know each other. Victory! This battle was definitely an unprecedented victory in the history of the Magus world. He had actually killed a Grade 5 Lesser Lord of Calamity in the realm. This was an unprecedented event in the realm's history. Many participants, especially the 7 middle-rank 4 powerhouses, surrounded the remains of the Hydra lizard excitedly, their faces flushed with excitement. This Tier 5 monster had just been killed not long ago, so its body and soul were still fresh. Under Grimm's command, the Grade 4 players of the Central Continent immediately turned into picky butchers, excitedly harvesting and preserving the remaining enchanted organs. The 5-faced serpent had died a terrible death. Most of its body had been destroyed by the Grade 5 divine spell, and the parts that were not destroyed had been churned into a mess by the raging flames. However, it was still a Tier 5 dire beast. Even a piece of scale, a piece of flesh, or a piece of bone was a high-grade resource that was hard to come by for the wizards present. Flesh. That was fresh meat cut from a Tier 5 dire beast. And they had done it with their own hands, not to mention anything else. Just this glory alone would make them feel exceptionally proud when they thought about it 100 years later. Scale removal, skin removal, flesh gouging, bone removal, tendon extraction, blood collection, marrow collection, brain extraction. Many of the Central Continent's Grade 4 players were not willing to let others do the dirty work, so they crowded around the carcass and busied themselves. Wizards from other organizations could only watch from afar with envy, not daring to approach the slaughterhouse at all. Declan, the only physique refinery wizard in the Central Continent, rolled up his sleeves and trousers like a bloodthirsty butcher. He grabbed a Grade 4 broadsword that someone had contributed, sweating profusely as he quickly cut up the spoils of war. The reason he was sweating profusely was not because he was tired, but because he was excited. He held the scales of a Tier 5 dire beast in his hands, stepped on the flesh of a Tier 5 dire beast, and hacked at the bones and tendons of the Tier 5 dire beast. His face was drenched in the blood of the Tier 5 dire beast. Yet, Declan was doing such dirty work with gusto, as if he did not need anyone's help to finish off this huge dire beast. Clara, Alfred, Matthew, Nicholas, and the rest gathered around him, taking out magic sealing boxes and chests from their storage rings. They carefully dug out the enchanted organs from the bloodstains, casting spells to preserve them before sealing them one by one. The biggest contributor to this battle, the legendary fire wizard Grimm, stood silently near the crevice in Moyuan Valley, slowly retracting the overflowing flame energy and returning to his human form. It was a ghastly sight, full of holes. Grimm's exposed body was densely covered in all kinds of scars and injuries, especially the places where the Hydra lizard had ruthlessly torn apart. Large patches of flesh and blood were a ghastly sight to behold. Even the parts of his body that were still in good condition were covered in strange green, black, or purple spots. They were the elemental toxins left in Grimm's body after the Hydra lizard had bitten him. If he did not find a way to get rid of them, Grimm would not be able to recover from the damage, killing 1,000 enemies, but losing 800. After all, Grimm was not a physique refinery wizard that excelled in close combat, so he was at a great disadvantage in close combat. This caused his body to be severely damaged, and he was on the verge of being heavily injured. But fortunately, he had won. This gave him enough time and energy to slowly heal the wounds on his body. He assigned the task of gathering resources and materials to his subordinates, and slowly closed his eyes to begin the healing process. This was also his intention to let the Grade 4 wizards of the Central Continent have a greater sense of participation and strengthen their cohesion. From their joyful and enthusiastic attitude, it could be seen that their acceptance of Grimm could not be compared to the past. The feeling of pride and excitement for the Central region had gradually sprouted and grew in their hearts. While Grimm closed his eyes to heal himself, he suddenly sensed something and opened his eyes to look at an unfamiliar figure that was slowly approaching him. The figure was less than 2 meters tall, about the size of a finger in front of Grimm. However, the powerful energy contained in his body was something that even Grimm would have to be careful of at his peak. This was a young wizard with a passable appearance, but his aquiline nose, thin lips, and two heavy dark blue-eye bags perfectly destroyed his image, giving off a bad impression that he was a man who had been drinking too much and was putting on a strong front, but was inwardly weak inside. However, Grimm did not judge people by their appearance, but by the luster of energy in their bodies. Even if a normal wizard had a protective force field around them, it could not stop Grimm from probing through the laws of the world. However, this young wizard in front of him was like a black hole of energy. Grimm could not even detect the attribute of the energy in his body. This was not the first time he felt this way. Grimm had felt the same way when he saw Grimm using a grade 5 magic tool. The other party stopped 500 meters away and did not try to get closer to Grimm. Although they were both human sorcerers, there was no mutual trust or friendship between them. If he continued to move forward, he would break through this safe distance and trigger Grimm's instinctive reaction. 500 meters. This distance was just right. Even if the other party showed hostility, they would have enough time to react. Therefore, no powerful wizard would allow another powerful being to get too close to them. If someone really did not know what was good for them and violated this safe distance at that time, in order to protect themselves, they would have to fight each other. Of course, Angor and Grimm belonged to the Wizard Association. Although they did not get along, they still trusted each other. "You're Angor." "I've heard of you." Grimm examined the other party and spoke first. "I think you're the strongest wizard in the Magus Association. You should remove the seams." This Magus Angor said arrogantly, but soon after, he smiled mischievously. "However, in front of a legendary fire Magus like you, we have no right to be arrogant. A grade 5 creature. I really didn't expect that even a terrifying grade 5 creature would die in your hands." "How terrifying? Did you come here just to lament about this?" Grimm said with a smile that did not seem like a smile. "Of course not. I just wanted to discuss something with you. I see that your injuries are quite serious. Why don't you let the healers of our association treat you? This way, your combat strength will also recover a little faster." When it came to serious matters, Unli couldn't help but say, with a serious expression, "Also, these are your spoils of war. Keep them well." With these words, Angor raised his hand and threw out 4 fist-sized crystals of different colors, slowly floating towards Grimm. Grimm scanned the area, and the AI chip's prompt sounded in his mind. Detected 4 high-energy elemental crystals at the pinnacle of Grade 4. Their attributes are hurricane, ice, rock, and flame. According to the analysis, they should be the energy crystals condensed from the heads of the Hydra lizard that exploded. He did not expect Angor to not hide anything, and was even willing to spit out these energy crystals that had reached the peak of Grade 4. The coldness on Grimm's face melted a little. Just as he was about to converse with this tactful Magus Angor, the group of Central Continent Magi suddenly let out excited shrieks that sounded like the wails of ghosts and the howls of wolves. Soon after, Declan crawled out of the 5 corpses, covered in blood. His hands were holding a huge dark green crystal in front of him. Rank 5, Rank 5, Declan's high-pitched and somewhat ear-piercing voice was already distorted, but in the ears of those who heard it, it was like a clap of thunder that shook their souls. Chapter 14:15. Everyone's attention was instantly attracted by the dark green crystal that Declan held high in his hands. Even though it was a few hundred meters away, the strange ripples of laws on the dark green crystal left a deep impression on everyone. Even Wizard Onley, who was unmoved by the 4 elemental crystals, changed his expression the moment he sensed the ripples of laws. He suddenly turned his head, and his dark eyes revealed a scorching and greedy gaze as he stared at the crystal. A crystal of laws. This was definitely a crystal of laws. A terrifying beast was roaring in Wizard Onley's heart. He almost couldn't wait to reach out and hug the crystal in his arms. He wanted to taste the law inside. Although poison was incompatible with his original element, this was a crystal of laws. No one would complain about having too many. Just as he was about to lose control of his emotions, the legendary fire wizard Grimm waved his hand, and a ball of golden flames wrapped around the dark green crystal and flew into his hand. At the same time, a similar dark green figure crawled out of Grimm's body and jumped on Grimm's shoulder like a naughty child who didn't get any candy. "Give it to me, master. I want that thing. I want it. I want it. I want it." It was the plague spirit, Remy, who hadn't shown himself for a long time. Ever since the secret voodoo scroll had swallowed the Book of Wisdom, it had jumped from rank 4 to rank 5. However, Remy's soul force was too weak to control such a powerful body, so he could only fall into a deep sleep for a long period of time. Now that he suddenly sensed this poison crystal that was completely compatible with his original element, Remy was naturally overjoyed. He couldn't wait to devour it to strengthen his soul and the law of poison. Of course, Grimm wouldn't refuse his request. Remy was the spirit of his soul armament. After all, if Remy could become stronger, it would be easier for him to control the Book of Darkness in the future. He wouldn't need to sleep for a long period of time every time he tried to use it, just to accumulate enough soul force for the next use. Therefore, after obtaining the poison crystal of law, Grimm didn't hesitate to feed it to Remy's mouth. Remy, who was originally only 1 meter tall, suddenly opened his mouth to the widest and swallowed it in one gulp. He then rubbed his protruding belly in satisfaction and turned around to enter Grimm's body again. Seeing this scene, Wizard Onley, who was still thinking about how to make a deal with Grimm, had a stunned expression on his face. After a long while, his expression turned into one of disappointment and despair. He didn't even have the mood to strike up a conversation. Grimm might not know how rare a crystal of laws was, but Onley, who was active in the foreign lands, knew. For example, the traditional sorcerer system divided the sorcerer's power into 9 levels from rank 1 to rank 9, and each level corresponded to a corresponding power standard. Other than that, there was another system that divided wizards based on the source of their power. Grade 1 to Grade 3 sorcerers mainly used elemental energy. Whether it was to strengthen the body or the soul, the source of the sorcery power they could use was always the elemental particles. These wizards were called elemental wizards. Once they reached rank 4, they would become the strongest force in the plane world, and they would have the qualifications to come into contact with the laws of the plane. At this stage, wizards would have to work hard to convert their elemental force into the corresponding law, and then condense and improve the source of their power. Their familiarity with the plane's laws would become the benchmark to measure their basic strength. Such a magus could be called a law magus. On the other hand, Tier 5 and Tier 6 sorcerers mainly relied on the power of laws. They needed to condense the power of laws into their own power of laws. Only by completely mastering a certain power of laws could a rank 4 wizard become a god, surpassing the natural mode of the plane and becoming a great wizard who transcended life and death. Rank 5 and rank 6 Grand Magi were also known as Magi of Laws. As for those above rank 6, had only heard of them from others. Rank 7 and 8 Great Wizards no longer controlled the power of laws, but the power of a higher world. He didn't know what kind of power it was, or where it came from. As for the peak of wizards, those rank 9 Great Wizards, they controlled a strange thing called origin force. Amway's understanding of origin power had become even more vague and incomprehensible. If he wasn't a core member of the Magus Association, he probably wouldn't even know this information. After all, this was the most top-level and confidential information in the Magus Association. Only had been stuck at the peak of rank 4 for 300 years, but he still couldn't upgrade his law force to the power of laws. This was also the only reason why he had left the sorcerer world and wandered the outer realms. Gloria and the other super powerhouses of the association were the same, facing the huge problem of converting laws into laws. Thus, when Onley saw a crystal of laws appear in front of him, the huge shock in his heart was so great that even his little heart couldn't bear it. Laws. Laws. Why were laws so difficult to comprehend? One of the main reasons was that the power of laws was illusory and untraceable. It was just a magical and grand force that was produced when the plane world operated according to a predetermined system of laws. One could only slowly experience and comprehend the existence of the higher laws through the end of the law that they controlled. This was like asking a doctor who had never dissected a human body to guess the source of blood, the shape of the heart, and the mechanism of its operation. The difficulty of this task could be imagined. Thus, it had to be said that those who could cross the threshold of the plane to become a rank 5 wizard were all extremely lucky, and their knowledge of wizard theory was extremely profound. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to achieve such shocking results. Seeing Grimm feed a precious crystal of laws to some kind of pet, Onley's heart almost broke. He reluctantly exchanged a few more words with Grimm, then hurriedly ran away from Grimm's side. While the big shots were harvesting the spoils of war and enjoying the rare after-effects of the battle, a large number of wizards from the association and groups of wizard troops swarmed out of the wizard's pagoda and began to carefully clean up the entire battlefield. Grimm quietly stood at the edge of the large crack in the ink abyss valley. With him around, the disaster creatures and mutant beasts were suppressed within the crack, not daring to show themselves. This gave the Wizard Association a rare opportunity to take back the battlefield. All the surviving mutant beasts were slaughtered one by one, then cut into necessary wizard ingredients. With such a large number of high-quality ingredients, the wizards of the association could create more powerful wizard beasts. The war wizard pagodas that had been destroyed were also cleaned up, and new war wizard pagodas were quickly rebuilt from scratch on top of the original ruins. There was also a large number of wizards from the association riding giant owls or double-headed eagles above the crack, sprinkling some strange green plants down. These green plants grew at a speed visible to the naked eye as soon as they landed on the ground. Their roots and tentacles were like enchanted daggers, piercing into the rock walls that were as hard as steel. The green branches and leaves that spread out shook happily in the mist, swallowing the evil and filthy aura of disaster in the air. With their help, the fog in the valley gradually thinned and thinned. Other than the inside of the valley, which was still shrouded in mist, the outside of the valley had already returned to its original appearance. As the aura of disaster was purified, the Sorcerer World's plane law chain also grew and spread at a crazy rate. The aura of the plane law here was also getting thicker. The plane's consciousness transmitted joy and joy to every living being that was busy in the Ink Abyss Valley through the laws. Of course, for the low-level wizards, they just felt more motivated the more they worked, and the busier they were, the more relaxed they felt. They could not understand the existence and source of this mysterious power. As for the Tier 4 sorcerers, they closed their eyes and focused, silently sensing the traces of planar feedback surging into their bodies. This was a rare opportunity for them to have direct contact with the plane's consciousness. Under the nourishment of the threads of plane feedback, the previously blurry plane law would inexplicably light up, becoming clear and intuitive. The power of the rule that he couldn't touch in the past would also vaguely reveal itself like a mirage. This was why the high-grade wizards would flock like ducks every time they fought against a plane invasion. The plane feedback and the plane's consciousness's blessing after a victory was a rare opportunity to comprehend laws. If not for this large-scale planar war that could trigger a sense of crisis from the plane's consciousness, they would not have received such a degree of blessing. From this point of view, the 7 level 4 wizards that followed Grimm from the central continent to Ink Abyss Valley had also benefited from their efforts. They had put in so much effort and risked their lives to fight against the creatures of disaster, and this was the only thing they could get in return. Although the level 4 wizards that stayed in the central continent were safe now, they obviously did not have such a rare opportunity. This was why danger, opportunity, and danger would always coexist. The Sorcerer Association would naturally not be stingy with Grimm, who had contributed greatly to this war. More than 10 level 2 and level 3 healers flew around Grimm. Using milky white divine energy, to remove the accumulated elemental toxins in his body. Even more healers shot out rays of green light in front of Grimm's huge body and applied healing potions that stimulated the recovery of the flesh, doing their best to repair all the injuries. With Grimm's huge body and terrifying elemental resistance, any of his wounds would probably require several kilograms of high-grade healing potions to have a slight effect. The fact that the Sorcerer Association was willing to spare no expense to save Grimm showed their sincerity in trying to establish a good relationship with him. Chapter 14:16. At the edge of the battlefield, the Northern Witches and the Silver Alliance were resting and recovering in silence. After hastily absorbing the feedback of the plane and comprehending the manifestation of laws, the Northern Witches gathered around the leader of the Witches of Death, Thuna, and discussed in low voices. What is the Sorcerer Association trying to do? Are they trying to mend their relationship with Grimm? Circe said. Due to the previous conflict, Circe had always hated the legendary fire sorcerer incomprehensible to outsiders. Unfortunately, even though she had thought of all kinds of ways to suppress him, he still rose steadily step by step. Now, even she, the leader of the Dark Witches, had to be careful in front of him, afraid that he would have something on her. When she thought of how badly she had suffered at his hands, Circe could not help but feel resentful. However, as soon as Circe spoke, Thuna's cold gaze fell on her. Circe, I don't care what conflict you had with Grimm before. From this moment onwards, it has been written off. You must maintain basic etiquette and respect at all times. Otherwise, even I can't protect you if he starts to provoke you. Do you understand? Yes. Circe immediately agreed obediently. Although both of them were leaders of the witches and had equal status, Thuna had been famous for a long time and had the strength of a super-powerful being. Hence, among the leaders of the witches, she and the leader of the Pale Witches, Sylvia, were the big sisters of all the witches. They were respected by all the other witches. Thuna sighed inwardly. She could see that Circe was still not convinced on the surface. Ever since these high-grade witches had advanced to grade 4, they had become human beings and lived a noble life. They had never experienced the dark strife and bloody and cruel internal struggles between the sorcerers. They were still too young and arrogant. They did not know how serious the consequences of offending a powerful sorcerer who was growing rapidly would be. The Sorcerer Association was so powerful and had such a solid foundation. When it was time to submit, they would not fall out with a future great sorcerer. Circe, on the other hand, had rashly intervened in the battle of the Destiny Witches for the sake of her family's personal interests, and now she was sinking deeper and deeper. Circe herself might not have sensed the impending crisis, but Thuna already had a premonition that the entire Dark Witches would fall into a trough because of her recklessness and impulsiveness. The Northern Witches had fallen from the original 13 branches to the current 8 branches, and their strength was not as good as before. Among them, the Austere Witch and the Destiny Witch's inheritance had been severed for nearly 1,000 years due to special reasons, and it was only in the past few hundred years that their inheritance was rediscovered. If anything were to happen to the Dark Witches, the situation in the northern region would become even more turbulent. Although Circe's words were a bit rash, her speech obviously resonated with the Northern Witches. Angelina, the leader of the Deceit Witches, could not help but ask, Sister Thuna, aren't you surprised by the Sorcerer Association's actions? Previously, they had fought with Grimm, but now they were like a family again. What are they doing? Thuna looked around and saw the confusion on the faces of her sisters. She could only shake her head and sigh. This is an overt plot by the Sorcerer Association. An overt plot? The witches were puzzled. I'm afraid everyone can see that no one can suppress the legendary fire warlock Grimm now. As long as he exists, the central continent will be his. None of the 3 of us will be able to touch it. Doesn't that mean the 3 of us should work together to suppress Grimm? What does that have to do with them trying to curry favor with us? You still look down on high-grade wizards. You don't know how terrifying a powerhouse who's out of control can be. Thuna looked around and said coldly, "Let me tell you this. With Grimm's current strength, if he abandons his base and fights guerrilla warfare, he can easily destroy any wizard faction." Hiss! All the witches sucked in a breath of cold air. Although they had experienced the power of a legendary fire warlock through the battle just now, they still did not expect Thuna to think so highly of him. If that was the case, did that mean that Grimm did not have any enemies in the wizard world? Among the three major factions, the Silver Alliance has the City in the Sky, and the Wizard Association has the Overlook Tower. With these two fortresses, no matter how unsolvable the situation is, as long as they retreat, they will have a chance to stabilize themselves. But our northern lands do not have such top-level wizard facilities. Once we fall out with Grimm, all of the northern witches will face the possibility of collapse. At this point, Thuna paused and looked coldly at Circe. "I know that you dark witches have gained a lot from developing the shadow dimension over the years, and have also nurtured a large number of dark armies. However, if you continue to provoke that Grimm, he will smash your dark secret realm into pieces. What can you do to him then? Are you going to lead the dark army to chase after him? It's not like you haven't seen the power of a powerful fighter. That fire wizard can kill hundreds of thousands of mutated beasts and creatures of disaster alone, forcing them back to the Black Ink Valley. Circe, do you think your dark army will be enough to burn him with a burning domain?" Circe finally lowered her pretty face this time. Her body hidden in the black fog could not help but tremble a little. Thuna did not want to crush Circe's fighting spirit too much, and quickly revealed the answer to her question. "It's a good thing that the Wizard Association is trying to rope in Grimm. It means that they have understood that a direct attack will not be effective, and will only force him to the opposite side of us. So, they used an overt scheme to send Grimm out of the wizard world. If we do not find a way to speed up this process, with Grimm's strength and age, he will have no problem ruling the central region for close to 1,000 years before he advances. 1,000 years is too long for us three major wizard organizations, so the association will definitely do its best to satisfy Grimm's needs. All we want is for him to advance to level 5 as soon as possible and be banished from the wizard world by the laws of the dimension. A central region without Grimm. That vampire Mary will not be able to support it." The witches came to a sudden realization and could not help but nod in unison. Indeed, in a situation where they could not continue to suppress Grimm, it was undoubtedly a wise plan to try their best to shorten the time he had to rule the central region. Even if Grimm had sensed it, he would not be able to give up the desire and impulse to advance to a great wizard as soon as possible. However, the once famous three major wizard organizations had now fallen to the point where they had to use such a method to deal with a magus of the central region. Thinking about it, they felt a little sad and helpless. The battle was not truly over. Although all the creatures of disaster had been chased back to the deep Ink Valley, they were still entrenched in the underground crack, tightly guarding the huge spatial crack. If they dragged on for too long and allowed them to erode the foundation of the plane, once the spatial barrier was broken, the rank 6 Lord of Disaster would be able to enter the wizard world, and all their previous efforts would be for naught. Only within the planar plane, under the suppression of the planar law, could Tier 4 warlocks kill Tier 5 lesser disaster lords. Once they lost the advantage of the spatial barrier, they would not be able to withstand a single slap from the rank 6 Lord of Disaster. That was why they could not afford to lose the spatial barrier, no matter how great the sacrifice was. Hence, after cleaning up the battlefield and purifying the aura of disaster around the valley, a large number of wizard beasts rushed into the crack under the guidance of the Magi. There, the wizard beasts and mutated beasts switched positions. This time, the wizard beasts were the main attackers, while the mutated beasts defended with their lives, treating the entire crack as a battlefield. In order to prevent the wizard beasts from being infected and betraying them, the main attackers this time were a group of steel puppets, magic armored warriors, and animated runes. At the forefront were the magic armored warriors. They were all more than 3 meters tall, and their bodies were in the shape of armored warriors. Their insides were hollow, and they were supported by pure magical energy. With a shield in one hand and a sword in the other, they marched forward with heavy steps. 5 in a row, they marched forward in a neat formation. As soon as they entered the mist, the group of mutated beasts that had been huddled together rushed over. The mutated beasts of flesh and blood immediately collided with the group of iron-armed magic armor warriors. These magic armored warriors were not as clumsy and sluggish as the common iron golems. Their movements were very agile and accurate, and they were not afraid of death. Facing the pouncing mutated beasts, the magic armored warriors stepped forward and slammed the giant shield in their left hand, knocking the opponent unconscious before raising their swords to slash. The magic armored warriors had no life at all, so there was no fear or retreat. They were a group of thick metal armors, giant shields, and heavy swords animated by magical energy. Therefore, there was no other way to deal with them. They could only use force to knock away the shields and swords, and smash their magic armors to make them completely lose their combat power. The characteristics of these spells determined their battle style. That was to charge and kill. Facing the raging swarm of mutated beasts, the magic armored warriors raised their swords and swung their giant shields to protect themselves. Step by step, they killed their way into the underground space. The mutated beasts, on the other hand, made full use of their agile and treacherous bodies to attack from the front, from the side, from climbing the rock walls, or from above. Chapter 14:17. There was no such thing as mercy or forgiveness in the planar wars. One side was a blatant invader, while the other was a defender of their homeland. There was no possibility of reconciliation or coexistence between the two. Either the invaders defeated the native defenders and became the new ruling class of the world, or the native defenders annihilated all the invaders and successfully preserved their ruling position. There was no other way. Hence, in the face of the menacing creatures of disaster, the Magus Association was forced to use their trump card, a large number of enchanted runes and metal puppets. Of course, in this aspect, the Magus Association could not be compared to the Silver Alliance. The main reason why the Silver Alliance chose to establish their base in the west of the continent was that most of the rare mineral resources of the Magus continent were concentrated there. They excavated, tempered, and modified the resources nearby, creating a nation of puppets that would amaze the world. Other Magus organizations had to tremble with fear and tread carefully in the face of the onslaught of the demon wave. A moment of carelessness would allow the tide-like beast horde to flood into the human country they were protecting, weakening the foundation and future of their organization. Only the Silver Alliance was unbelievably valiant, pulling out an entire army of puppets to fight head-on against the kings of the forest that had gathered. They forcibly blocked the mountainous sea of beasts at the edge of the Black Forest, not allowing them to advance an inch. If not for the fact that the puppet army could not fight far from the energy pools, the Silver Alliance might have dared to lead the puppet army into the Black Forest and wipe out the kings of the monsters, utterly defeating them. As for the invasion within the Silver Alliance's territory, it was suppressed by the powerful puppet army and could only cause some small waves in the local areas. Once the puppet army pressed on, the foreign invaders would not be able to resist the tide of the Golem army and the animated Rune army. The strength of the Silver Alliance was evident from this. However, the success of the Golem army was due to the Golems, and the downfall was due to them. The army of Golems was indeed unstoppable, but they were too big, too heavy, and their movements were also extremely slow. As the defensive force within the territory, with sufficient energy and vehicles, the Golem army could unleash a terrifying might that could destroy mountains. But once they left the territory ruled by the Silver Alliance, without the astonishing number of airships as their vehicles and the densely packed energy pools to replenish their energy, the powerful battle prowess of the Magic Colossus army would be greatly reduced. As the Sorcerer World's #1 sorcerer organization, The Sorcerer Association's overall strength could crush the other two sorcerer organizations. However, they were still far inferior to the Silver Alliance in terms of construct golems. Without such superb golem building skills and abundant rare mineral resources, the Wizard Association did not have the ability to build their own golem army, so they could only use a simplified version of the Magic Armor Warrior. Although it was called a Magic Armor Warrior, there was no flesh or blood inside it. It was a hollow steel armor that had been enchanted and could perform various battle movements according to the will of the wizard. This kind of Magic Armor Warrior was loyal and valiant, and it was exceptionally worry-free to use. The only weakness was that their defense wasn't strong enough. The golems created by the Silver Alliance were all abnormally heavy and solid metal puppets. Even their metal arms were a meter thick. Even if they didn't use any weapons, smashing their fists on any living creature would be no different from being hit by a battering ram. On the other hand, the Magic Armor Warriors of the Wizard Association were hollow inside. Although this saved a large amount of metal materials, it also caused their defense to plummet. Under normal circumstances, the Wizard Association would send out a large number of organized wizard beasts during a dimensional war, and these Magic Armor Warriors were completely used as guards of the Wizard's Pagoda. But now, the wizard beasts were easily tempted by the powerful Lord of Disaster who had a strange ability to infect others. Thus, the association could only let the wizard beasts retreat to the second line, and let the assembled Magic Armor Warriors become the vanguard to attack the Dark Ink Valley. After suffering a head-on attack from the wizards, the mutated beasts that had passed through the space fissure were restrained by the disaster creatures, no longer surging out of the earth fissure. Instead, they entrenched themselves in the depths of the fog, silently waiting for the moment the space law chain around the space fissure would break. After all, the sorcerer world was a large dimension with a shocking number of powerful wizards. When they gathered together, even the disaster creatures that had wreaked havoc in so many dimensions would find it difficult to defend against them. After all, they were invaders here and would always be suppressed by the laws of the dimension. It was difficult for them to display their full strength. Otherwise, the ridiculous scene of a level 5 Lesser Lord of Disaster being killed on the spot by a level 4 wizard would not have happened. Low-level disaster creatures might not be afraid of death, but high-level disaster creatures had intelligence and consciousness that was no weaker than any other intelligent race. They were delicate and precious, and would naturally want to take advantage of the benefits. But once they found out that there was a powerful existence hidden in the target dimension that could threaten and kill them, they would immediately cower. These lesser lords of disaster were like a group of greedy bears, drooling over the honeycomb honey in the tree hole. If there were only bees inside, even if it meant being stung a few times, they would still stick their heads in and feast on the honey. But if there was a poisonous snake hidden in the honeycomb that could threaten their lives, then it was not worth it to lose their lives for a few mouthfuls of food. The 4 lesser disaster overlords who had returned to hide in the canyon were now in a dilemma. There were a large number of powerful magi gathered above, and they took turns to attack. Even a lesser Lord of Calamity, like them, would find it hard to endure. Retreat. Outside the spatial crack, the leader of the Lesser Lords of Disaster, the Level 6 Lord of Disaster, Dilmas, was guarding there. If they returned without success, with Dilmas's temper, he would definitely choose an unlucky one and swallow him alive to punish them for their cowardice and failure. In such a dilemma, the 4 Lesser Lords of Disaster could only desperately summon a large number of mutated beasts from the other dimensions they ruled, hoping to rely on them to defend the canyon and wait for the moment when the chains of laws of the dimension would loosen. As for charging out and fighting with the wizards, as long as the legendary fire wizard was still guarding the exit of the canyon, they would be digging their own graves. The legendary fire wizard's body was too large. It was almost impossible for him to squeeze into the canyon. This way, without him holding the line, the other powerful wizards would have to face the combined attacks of the 4 Lesser Lords of Disaster. If this stalemate continued, they would continuously corrode and pollute the spatial crack below, and they might really be able to delay the time until the spatial crack could accommodate level 5 power. Once that moment came, the 4 lesser Calamity Lords that could fully display their powers would definitely sweep through the entire sorcerer world like breaking dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. The so-called wizards could only hide in the wizard's pagoda, trembling in fear and struggling at death's door. When that time came, the major wizard organizations would probably only be able to escape. As for their territories and resource points, they would all be thrown to the creatures of disaster. If that really happened, even if they had to sell everything they had, the major wizard organizations would have to use their last resort, pleading with the great wizards who had left the wizard world to come back from the depths of the Milky Way. After leaving the wizard world and cutting off most of the connections with the sorcerer plane, it was unknown if the great wizards would still be willing to risk their lives to come back. Even if the great wizards were willing to come back, within the wizard world, the power of both sides was suppressed to the same level. Even if the great wizards could repel the attack of the Lords of Disaster, it was still a huge unknown. It was precisely because both sides had a reason not to retreat that an unusually bloody battle broke out. The first team of 1,000 magic armored warriors entered the Black Ink Valley, and they were completely wiped out in just half a day. At the bottom of the Black Ink Valley, tens of thousands of beasts were moving about. Beasts squeezed against beasts, beasts against beasts. It had practically become a monster forest of mutated beasts. The magic armor warriors only advanced 500 meters before they were blocked on the slope by the swarm of mutated beasts. Both sides started a life and death battle, and the final result was that the mutated beasts killed this team of 1,000 magic armored warriors with 50,000 casualties. The moment the first troop of magical armor was annihilated, the second troop of 1,000 magical armor trod on the ground full of blood and mud, pushing away the wreckage of magical armor and the broken bodies of mutated beasts that were blocking their way, and rushed into the slope of death step by step. This time, they were followed by a team of nearly 100 wizards, all of whom were elemental wizards. When the second team of 1,000 magic armored warriors clashed with a group of mutated beasts again, violent and terrifying elemental waves appeared behind them. Then, like a storm, elemental spells began to wreak havoc on the entire front of the battlefield. Violent lightning storms that seemed like they could destroy the world, sharp earth spears that shot up from the ground, whirlpools that contained countless wind blades, ice blades and snow swords that fell from the sky, and large areas of pale green poisonous clouds. The wizards' attacks did not deliberately avoid the magic armored warriors. Instead, they tried their best to throw the spells at the most concentrated area of the group of mutated beasts. Under the sweep of the berserk sorcery, not to mention those mutated beasts with bodies of flesh and blood, even the magic armor warriors with steel bodies and magic resistance runes inscribed on their shells could not withstand such a degree of sorcery attack. Batches of mutated beasts fell and died at the front of the battlefield. Their corpses were completely torn and shredded by the violent witchcraft, turning into lumps of unidentifiable body parts or bloodstains on the ground. The slope of the Rift Valley that had sucked in the blood of the mutated beasts quickly became unusually sticky and slippery after being stepped on by a pair of heavy and solid iron feet. But all this obviously didn't stop the cannon fodder from the two different planes from continuing to fight bravely without fear of death. Thus, the next batch of mutated beasts continued to rush out and collided with the magic armored warriors who were trampling on the corpses and blood. Then, violent witchcraft descended from the sky, once again turning the battlefield into a bloody and cruel slaughterhouse. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.